Chapter 148. Unlike Sensoji in Dongdatai district, Sensoji on the outskirts of Ninghu was a real small temple. As one of the tourist attractions of Ninghu, Sensoji was bustling during the day, but at night, the whole area around Sensoji looked extremely cold. At 12 o'clock in the evening, a convoy of 6 Toyotas slowly approached the gate of Sensoji. None of the 6 cars turned on the lights, but they moved slowly in the faint light of the daytime running lights. They moved very slowly and looked a little sneaky. In the back row of the Toyota in the middle of the convoy, Li Tianlan sat quietly and looked at the gate of Sensoji getting closer and closer. His expression was indifferent, but his eyes flashed with cold light. The Underground Research Institute of Sensoji could be said to be the most important hunting target of his trip to Ninghu. But to be honest, at the beginning, Li Tianlan did not pay much attention to Sensoji. His current realm could be said to stay in the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. Although there was a big realm that was promoted by drugs, it was a little superficial. But in terms of real combat capability, he had the wind and thunder veins, the chi-controlling realm of the pseudo-invincible realm, the Buddhist incantation of 9 words, the unique skill of the Li family. With so many unique conditions accumulated on him, his current combat capability could absolutely exceed everyone's expectations. Under the invincible realm, he might not be able to beat some experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but it was not difficult for him to leave. He came to Sensoji to assassinate an internationally renowned ordinary scholar. Even if the Underground Research Institute of Sensoji was heavily guarded, it would not be more difficult than assassinating Miyamoto Xianxia. At worst, he could kill Dubian Xiangyuan and leave. The other 2 relatively unimportant targets could be killed in the future. But after getting the news from Shitian Mingzi, Li Tianlan realized that Sensoji was definitely not a simple place. According to Shitian Mingzi, coming to Sensoji this time was tantamount to stepping into a trap that would surely kill him. But killing Dubian Xiangyuan was not the most difficult task on his hunting list. Was it because the intelligence of Zhongzhou state was not in place? Or did Yi Fengqing really have other plans? Li Tianlan took a deep breath, and his eyes looking out of the window became deeper and deeper. He did not have much contact with Yi Fengqing in the Sky Academy, or even very little. But from the bottom of his heart, Li Tianlan did not have a bad impression of the frivolous and unruly middle-aged man. If he knew the situation of Sensoji and deliberately assigned this hunting target to him, it was simply his intention to kill. Enemies? Or leaders and teachers? Li Tianlan was a little tired. The national plan should have been a situation of unity among all parties in Zhongzhou state. In this situation, if someone really had ulterior motives, it was absolutely a very disgusting thing. So after hearing Shitian Mingzi's description of Sensodo, Li Tianlan had a rage in his heart that seemed to be about to burst out for a whole day. The Research Institute Underground of Sensoji was codenamed Black Sunday. Its total area was not large. The upper and lower floors added up to an area of less than 10,000 square meters. However, the interior of the Research Institute used countless special alloys. A large number of offensive weapons were hidden in each key corridor. From the entrance to the core area of the Research Institute, there were nearly 30 alloy gates with a thickness of 3 to 5 meters. All of them required passwords, fingerprints, and pupil verification. Under normal circumstances, Li Tianlan would be trapped inside if he could not even pass the first gate. What's more, according to Shitian Mingzi, there was a small group of Kusanagi force in the Research Institute. Shitian Mingzi was vague about the Kusanagi force. She didn't mean to hide it, but she didn't know much about this top-secret force in East Island. She only said a few words and some speculations. It was extremely confusing, but Li Tianlan understood one sentence. Shitian Mingzi said that the Kusanagi force was a truly invincible team. A closed space, an invincible team, and many obstacles. This was simply an impossible hunting operation. If Shitian Mingzi or the Shitian Financial Group hadn't appeared, he might have been trapped in the Black Sun Institute now. Li Tianlan silently lit a cigarette, and the sharpness of his body grew colder. Tianlan, are you sure you want me to enter the Black Sun Institute with you? In the car, Shitian Mingzi's serious and cold voice sounded. The charm on the face of the wealthy daughter of the Shitian family had completely disappeared, and her eyes looking at Li Tianlan were full of seriousness and coldness. "You don't dare?" Li Tianlan asked calmly. As he spoke, the smoke of the cigarette wantonly drifted to Shitian Mingzi's face. "It's not that I don't dare." Shitian Mingzi shook her head calmly. "It's just that it's not necessary. You've already gotten the reset password of the Research Institute. The Black Sun Research Institute is basically defenseless to you now. My strength is not high. If I act with you, if anything happens, I'm likely to be a burden to you. I still insist on my opinion. Maybe it's the right choice for me to stay here to support you, if you trust me." "I'm sorry." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Shitian Mingzi's graceful face. He said with a faint smile, "I can't trust you. I did get the reset password of the Institute, but I can't guarantee that you don't have another password with higher authority." He waved his hand and said expressionlessly, "I believe in the sincerity of the Shitian Financial Group, and you have a good reason to turn to Samsara, but I can't trust you. You can think of it as me being timid and afraid of death, but you must enter the Black Sun Institute with me." "This is not timidity." Shitian Mingzi frowned and whispered, "You are too suspicious." Li Tianlan smoked the cigarette and remained calm. "What if I insist on my opinion and stay here?" Shitian Mingzi looked at Li Tianlan quietly and suddenly asked. Li Tianlan stopped smoking, turned around, and looked at Shitian Mingzi. The two looked at each other in silence, and the atmosphere in the carriage suddenly became a little depressed. After a long time, Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said faintly, "I can't let anyone who may control my life and death escape from my control, even if the possibility is low. So, if I insist on staying here, I will kill all of you and then enter the Black Sun Institute by myself. You may have the password in your hand, or you may not. You may harm me, or you may not. But as long as you are dead, all these possibilities will not exist." The atmosphere froze in an instant. Shitian Mingzi even had a feeling that she couldn't breathe in an instant. Until Li Tianlan's cigarette burned out, she took a deep breath and said coldly, "Tianlan, Shitian Financial Group is not malicious to you. The reset password in your hand is indeed the highest authority. We will not harm you. Aren't you afraid of killing the wrong person? If Shitian clan can prove its position afterward, I will apologize to you for my actions." Li Tianlan said, "Apologize? What was the use of apologizing when he was dead?" Shitian Mingzi bit her lip. In her sight, through the dim light, Li Tianlan's face was clear and blurry. His thin lips were tightly pursed, and there seemed to be infinite determination and indifference. Shitian Mingzi suddenly thought of an old saying of Zhongzhou State. "I'd rather betray the world than let the world betray me." The motorcade stopped less than 100 meters away from Sensoji Temple. The headlights were completely out. Li Tianlan threw the cigarette butt out of the car, looked at Shitian Mingzi, and said with a smile, "Are you coming with me?" He knew the sincerity of the Shitian clan. At present, Shitian Ingji, the controller of the Shitian Financial Group, had been secretly placed under house arrest by the Divine Wind Force and the Ministry of Finance in Dongdu. Shitian Mingzi's brother was also on the house arrest list. Of course, this kind of house arrest was not compulsory, and nothing could be seen on the surface. Shitian Mingzi was able to evade the heavy attention and successfully contact Li Tianlan with nearly 20 family elites. She also announced her position and leaked some secret information. From this point of view, there was no problem for the Shitian clan to have the intention to turn to Samsara. But Li Tianlan did not dare to gamble, and he could not gamble. He had borne too much, so once anything that threatened him appeared, he would not hesitate to extinguish it at all costs. "Yes." Shitian Mingzi glanced at Li Tianlan and finally bowed, her tone soft. In the night, the two got out of the car at the same time and quickly rushed to Sensoji Temple 100 meters away under the hazy moonlight. The small wooden door of the temple was closed tightly. Li Tianlan and Shitian Mingzi jumped over the wall and entered silently. Shitian Mingzi made a gesture to Li Tianlan, indicating that they should act separately. At this point, Li Tianlan was not afraid that Shitian Mingzi would escape. He nodded slightly and went straight to the small courtyard of the abbot in the intelligence. Sensoji Temple was not big, and there were only 3 monks in the whole temple. The abbot was in the fire-flaming realm, and the 2 apprentices had just entered the ice-condensing realm. This was the guard force of the Black Sun Institute on the ground. It was not small, but in Li Tianlan's eyes, it was not big. The small courtyard of the abbot was located at the back of the temple. As soon as Li Tianlan stepped into the courtyard, a bright Taoist light had already spilled out. In the knife light, there was a very sharp cry, "Who?" Li Tianlan dodged the knife light. He didn't bother to say a word, and the silver swords lit up in an instant. In the bright knife light, a little flame had just risen and disappeared. Li Tianlan's figure had appeared outside the courtyard and went straight to the central hall. The entrance switch of the Black Sun Institute was located at the 3rd knuckle of the left hand of the Buddha statue in the hall. When Li Tianlan opened the mechanism, Shi Tianmingzi's figure just appeared in the hall. The floor in front of Li Tianlan was separated, and an entrance of about 2 meters appeared directly in front of the 2. The passage behind the entrance extended all the way down, and the light was soft and bright. Li Tianlan looked at Shi Tianmingzi calmly and said calmly, "Go down." Shi Tianmingzi's eyes were complicated. She gritted her teeth and walked directly into the passage. Li Tianlan followed closely and entered the passage. They had just walked less than 10 meters when the cracked floor behind them had automatically closed. The internal switch is in lab number 1. Tianlan, reset the password now. Shi Tianmingzi said softly. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the Black Sun Institute in front of him. What appeared in front of them was a corridor with a metallic luster. The rooms in the corridor were juxtaposed, looking solemn and awe-inspiring. The metal walls reflected a soft luster. Being in it, everything around them seemed to be brighter than ever. Li Tianlan took out something like a remote control from his pocket and pressed a series of numbers. Crack! In the Black Sun Institute, the sound of metal crashing sounded. The light in the institute dimmed for a moment, and then it was bright again. Shi Tianmingzi led the way in front, pressed the elevator that went straight to the 2nd floor downstairs, and strolled leisurely. The Black Sun Institute was an important part of the Night Spirit organization. Shitian Financial Group was also an important part of Night Spirit. And the best thing was that Shitian Financial Group was a very famous technology consortium in the whole East Island and even the whole Asia. In other words, a large number of alloys and all kinds of exquisite designs in the Black Sun Institute were made by Shitian Financial Group. Some of the weapons inside were also put in by Shitian Financial Group. As for the reset password in Li Tianlan's hand, it was set a long time ago. It was a task personally assigned by Tian Exin, one of the dominators of Night Spirit. From this, it could be seen how fierce the battle between Night Spirit and the East Island government had been over the years. With this reset password, everything in the Black Sun Institute was equivalent to nothing to Li Tianlan. If Li Tianlan hadn't met Shi Tianmingzi today, even if he rushed here, he would probably be trapped to death. The elevator went from the 1st floor to the 2nd floor. Shi Tianmingzi looked calm and led the way first. The environment on the 2nd floor was the same as on the 1st floor, but there were fewer rooms. There was a sense of precision science fiction everywhere. Shi Tianmingzi took Li Tianlan to an alloy door in the central area, turned to look at Li Tianlan, and said in a serious tone, "Tianlan, remember, kill in 1 blow. Kill in 1 blow." These 4 words were even directly related to the success or failure of their trip. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at the alloy door in front of him. Without hesitation, he kicked it out directly. Boom! The whole floor seemed to be shaking, and the alloy door was kicked open under the tremendous force. The 2 swords in Li Tianlan's hands were dazzling, and his whole body had quickly rushed into the number 1 laboratory of the Black Sun Institute. Shi Tianmingzi followed closely behind. "Who is it?" A roar of shock and anger suddenly sounded. In Shi Tianmingzi's sight, the whole laboratory was instantly filled with a large area of bright lightning. A middle-aged man in a kimono, with lightning all over his body, had stopped Li Tianlan at the first time. Behind the middle-aged man, an old man in a research suit quickly retreated after a slight daze. Boom! Li Tianlan and the middle-aged man fought in an instant. Under the full blow, Li Tianlan retreated a few steps, while the middle-aged man was directly blown out. "Doctor, hurry up!" The middle-aged man spat out blood and shouted with horror in his eyes. There was no need for him to speak at all. The old man, who kept retreating, had already opened his mouth to speak. Dongdu, Pegasus, Beihai, divine wind, setting sun. Words came out of the old man's mouth one by one. Crack! In the corner of the laboratory, the three statues that originally stood side by side began to shake in an instant, and countless dense cracks began to appear on the statues. Loyalty, fearlessness, blood, invincibility. Shi Yanmingzi's expression changed dramatically. Chapter 149. In the new year, I wish everyone a happy new year. May all your wishes come true. Well, nothing is better than the words, all your wishes come true. All your wishes come true, all your wishes come true. Li Tianlan didn't know what was going on, but the moment Dubian Xiangyuan stepped back and spat out the words, he had already noticed that something was wrong. The words were completely inexplicable when translated into Chinese. The pronunciation in Japanese was indescribably weird. The old tone kept echoing in the research institute. Li Tianlan instinctively sensed an extremely dangerous and strange aura. Flying fire, quicksand, polar bear, trample. The old tone sounded in a hurry and without interruption. Without hesitation, Li Tianlan rushed straight to Dubian Xiangyuan. One advanced and the other retreated. The distance of more than 20 meters between them was instantly shortened. The human emperor sword shone, and the surging sword intent gathered in front of Dubian Xiangyuan, completely enveloping him in an instant. In the blink of an eye, Dubian Xiangyuan's whole body was filled with bright electric light. The electric light and the sword qi intertwined quickly in front of Dubian Xiangyuan. The old scholar's body was already covered in blood, and the red blood splashed on his white research uniform. It was a shocking sight. The thunder-shocking realm expert who was defeated by Li Tianlan in a very short time had desperately rushed toward Li Tianlan. The lightning on his body was flashing intensely, and the whole research room had turned into a dazzling and deep light blue. The lightning passed through Li Tianlan's body, but it did not attack him. Instead, it built layers of defense in front of Dubian Xiangyuan. The sword light became sharper. The lightning became more dazzling. The two intertwined with each other, and the sharp sword intent tore everything apart. But time passed quickly. Missing, fish and shrimp, floating light, youth. Dubian Xiangyuan kept stepping back, and his eyes were fixed on Li Tianlan, but it was not a kind of anger and disgust for the intruder. His eyes were calm but fanatical, with an extremely contradictory expectation. The lightning on his body was getting weaker and weaker, but his tone was getting higher and higher. Billow, giant wave, misty rain, sunset. Boom! In the laboratory, the three statues kept shaking with the words, and countless cracks spread all over their bodies. Crack! A large piece of stone skin fell off. Vaguely, the silhouettes of three people appeared in the research institute. Shi Yanmingzi was in a daze, and her face was full of fear and despair. Li Tianlan didn't know what all this meant, but she had already guessed the truth. As the strongest force in East Island, the existence of the Kusanagi force had always been a top secret. If it weren't for some special reasons, the daughter of a top wealthy family like Shi Yanmingzi wouldn't know the existence of the Kusanagi force at all. But even so, she didn't know much about this highly secretive force in East Island. She only vaguely knew that the establishment of the Kusanagi force had an inseparable relationship with Night Spirit and Shitian Financial Group. This was an almost invincible force. Just a few days ago, she got the news again. The Kusanagi force needed to be awakened. Awakening, to put it coldly, was equivalent to activation. The words that Dubian Xiangyuan said were probably the activation codes of the Kusanagi force. In the research institute, all kinds of lights flickered, and the sharp edge almost filled the entire space, but Shi Yanmingzi's eyes became more and more frightened. The whole plan had a serious accident when they rushed into the laboratory. Normally, the Black Sun Institute could be said to be the most dangerous place on Li Tianlan's hunting list, But after getting the reset password provided by Mingzi, it would also become the easiest point. There were a lot of high-tech weapons here, but there were basically no elites guarding here. There were only dozens of scholars and researchers, and a small group of the Kusanagi force. And the Kusanagi force needed to be awakened. So as long as they killed Dubian Xiangyuan, who had the complete password, as soon as they rushed into the laboratory, they didn't need to care about the threat of the Kusanagi force at all. That was what Mingzi said before they entered the laboratory. But neither she nor Li Tianlan expected that there was a second person in the laboratory besides Dubian Xiangyuan. And he was an expert close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Mingzi had seen this middle-aged man. He was one of the top executives in the Divine Wind Force, General Fujiwara Ping. Why did he show up here? Li Tianlan was the young heavenly son of Zhongzhou State, but after all, his real realm was only the fire-flaming realm. In the face of an expert close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, even if he could win, he couldn't kill him in seconds. During this period of time, it was enough for Dubian Xiangyuan to activate a small team of the Kusanagi force in the laboratory. Fujiwara Ping. This was the biggest variable of this trip. Sunset. As soon as the last word came out, a stiff but extremely loud voice had covered the whole laboratory in an instant, wild and indifferent. In the laboratory, the stone skin of the three statues had completely fallen off, and countless lime fell to the ground. Under the stone skin, three figures, each more than 2 meters tall, took a step forward and said, "The password is correct. Number 9, protect me. Number 7, number 8, kill him." Without hesitation, Dubian Xiangyuan pointed at Li Tianlan and gave a direct order. The lightning in front of him had almost been completely twisted and disappeared by the sword light. Blood bloomed from every corner of his body, making him look extremely miserable. Li Tianlan's long sword shook. When he was about to stab Dubian Xiangyuan in front of him, Fujiwara Ping behind him had rushed over and clasped his shoulders with both hands. Blood flowed from the corner of the mouth of this high-level member of the Divine Wind Force, and his breath was weak. Just now, protecting Dubian Xiangyuan with all his strength seemed to have consumed most of the strength of this thunder-shocking realm expert. He gasped hard and sneered, "You're dead." Li Tianlan withdrew his long sword and turned around without hesitation to hit him with his elbow. Bang! Fujiwara Ping had already consumed most of his strength, and he barely blocked it. His whole body was suddenly hit and flew out. The sound of bones breaking rang out, accompanied by Fujiwara Ping's miserable groan. One of his arms was obviously broken. Blood came out from Li Tianlan's 2 shoulders. Li Tianlan frowned slightly and looked at the several bloody holes on his shoulders caused by Fujiwara Ping. Before he had time to react, the piercing sound of something breaking through the air suddenly sounded behind him. The Kusanagi force. Li Tianlan had no time to care about Fujiwara Ping. He suddenly turned around, and the moment his body retreated and pulled away, he stabbed straight with his sword. The raging fire flew up on the sword edge. The sword energy surged. In an instant, Li Tianlan seemed to be surrounded by fire. One after another, the long swords condensed from flames floated around him. As he stabbed straight with his sword, countless sword shadows rushed to the 2 burly figures in front of him at the same time. Charge! Li Tianlan rushed forward. The 2 figures also rushed forward at the same time. The distance was 5 meters. The 2 sides instantly got closer. For the first time, Li Tianlan officially saw the Kusanagi force that he had just heard of. Number 7, number 8, and number 9. Number 9 was standing beside Dubian Xiangyuan at this time, watching all this coldly and motionlessly. Number 7 and number 8 were in charge of attacking. Not to mention in East Island, where people were short, even if they were in any place, their figures could be said to be really tough. They were more than 2 meters tall, bald, and their faces without eyebrows and beards, which made their not ugly appearance look extremely weird. What was even weirder was their eyes. They were mechanical and numb, but there was an unparalleled fierce light in them. The muscles all over their bodies bulged as if they were about to explode. Their bodies looked very cumbersome, but they were extremely flexible in their movements. The most important thing was that they seemed to be fearless and ignore everything. The two heavy bodies ran wildly in the laboratory, and the whole ground was trembling slightly. In the face of the blazing fire and sword shadows, Number 7 didn't stop. He opened his hands, and his huge body rushed directly to Li Tianlan against the sword edge. Number 8 jumped up behind Number 7, waved his fists, and directly hit Li Tianlan's head. He was sober, indifferent, crazy, and mechanically stiff. The two of them cooperated tacitly, one in front and the other in the back. The moment Number 8 jumped up, Li Tianlan could only feel the surging power. There was no ice or fire in the air. Number 8 waved his fists, and the air suddenly burst out with a whistling sound that was almost like an explosion. Countless air was compressed together crazily, with an indescribable fierceness, from top to bottom. Ding! The blade of the long sword in Li Tianlan's hand was surrounded by fire. He stabbed with all his strength and directly stabbed into the heart of Number 7. The scene of the long sword piercing through the chest and splashing blood did not happen as he had imagined. The long sword pierced through the clothes, but it was like stabbing a steel plate, hard and stable. The opponent's body seemed to be unusually slippery, and most of the fire was extinguished the moment it touched the opponent. Number 7's body suddenly straightened against the blade of the sword. Instead of moving forward, the incomparably sharp human emperor began to bend. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted instantly. Number 8's fist-waving figure had passed Number 7 and whistled down. Li Tianlan's face changed for the first time. His body quickly became illusory, and when he appeared, he was already behind Number 7. Boom! Number 8's body fell to the ground. His joints shook, and a clear sound of metal crashing came from inside. Li Tianlan's shadow had dissipated, and the smoke and dust were flying all over the sky. Number 8's body missed its target and fell directly to the ground. A big hole with a depth of nearly half a meter was opened. Countless dense cracks spread over, and the whole laboratory shook violently. For the first time, Li Tianlan felt shocked in his heart. Without hesitation, he waved his sword again and stabbed the back of Number 7's head. "Watch out!" Tianmingzi's scream suddenly sounded. Li Tianlan's heart sank. Before he could do anything else, Number 7 seemed to have eyes in the back of his head. He suddenly turned around and swept his foot at the same time. Crack! The long sword stabbed Number 7's head fiercely. The blade cut through the skin, but it could not go any further. Number 7's face was expressionless, and he kicked Li Tianlan's waist hard. In an instant, Li Tianlan had no time to change positions with the shadow, and he was directly swept out by the powerful kick. His body flew nearly 20 meters away, smashed a large number of precision instruments, and spat out a mouthful of blood. Tianmingzi exclaimed and subconsciously ran to Li Tianlan's side. She murmured desperately, "They have special alloys in their bodies. You can't kill them." This is the Kusanagi force, a perfect combination of technology and biochemistry. We're finished. Li Tianlan wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth expressionlessly. Feeling the pain of his waist that was almost broken, he resisted the dizziness and calmly said, "How do you know?" "That batch of alloys," Tianmingzi smiled bitterly. "It was made by Tian Financial Group, or rather, Night Spirit snatched it from somewhere else and processed it by Tian Financial Group. I didn't know what East Island used it until today." Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat. He swallowed a mouthful of blood and said subconsciously, "You know their weaknesses?" "Weaknesses?" Chapter 150. In this world, there would be no truly perfect things without weaknesses, especially man-made products. Did the Kusanagi force have no weaknesses? Tianmingzi's words were directly filtered out by Li Tianlan. He could be sure that the Kusanagi force must have weaknesses, but they had not been discovered yet. Alloy bones, clear consciousness, super destructive power, no pain, no feelings, and amazing speed. In a flash, Li Tianlan had roughly sorted out the information of the Kusanagi force. Where were their weaknesses? The severe pain continued to spread in Li Tianlan's waist. The kick of Number 7 was full of power. The alloy bones were fully exerted, and the power easily broke through the limit of the human body. This kind of super soldier between the scientific and technological forces was not suitable for the four realms of martial arts. They had no realm, only the most terrifying power and destructive power. In terms of pure power, that kick was almost equivalent to the full blow of a thunder-shocking realm master. Li Tianlan subconsciously touched his waist, and a warm blood covered his palm. His mind was spinning rapidly, but number 7 and number 8 in front of him did not give him time at all. Without Dubian Xiangyuan's further order, the two metal monsters in human skin had rushed over madly. "Retreat," Li Tianlan said in a deep voice and pushed Shi Tianmingzi. Then he had switched places with the shadow and appeared behind number 7 and number 8. Shi Tianmingzi stood aside with a desperate expression, biting her lip and saying nothing. The Kusanagi force had been awakened. Number 9 guarded Dubian Xiangyuan, which was equivalent to guarding the mechanism opened inside the Black Sun Institute. In other words, if they could not break through the blockade of the Kusanagi force and kill or capture Dubian Xiangyuan, they could not get out at all. In this research institute, Li Tianlan and the Kusanagi force were really a life-and-death battle. Shi Tianmingzi silently retreated to the side. Her strength was not bad, but the strength at the peak of the ice-condensing realm could do nothing here. The full blow of any Kusanagi force warrior was enough to break her body. The only thing she could do was to wait. If Li Tianlan died, she would die. If Li Tianlan lived, she would live. The young heavenly son of Zhongzhou State, Shi Tianmingzi took a deep breath and stared at Li Tianlan, not even blinking. Li Tianlan was still moving. The second shadow appeared. Then the third shadow. Li Tianlan's figure kept flashing, and the three shadows instantly stretched into a triangle. Number 7 and number 8 did not hesitate at all. Their eyes flashed with red light, and the chips implanted in their eyes directly locked on Li Tianlan's real body, chasing closely. Li Tianlan took the last step. The shadow never disappeared. The three shadows stood in different positions with Li Tianlan, immediately forming a regular quadrilateral. Li Tianlan's eyes suddenly sharpened. He sheathed his sword. The two swords joined and extended, and the human emperor suddenly turned into a silver spear more than 2 meters long. The three shadows perfectly copied his movements at the same time. Li Tianlan's eyes were sharp. He raised his long spear and said in a low voice, "Stop." The three shadows simultaneously raised their hands. "Who?" The air in the research institute suddenly twisted in a shape visible to the naked eye. Large masses of air gathered toward number 7 and number 8, merging with the air in front of them that was compressed to the extreme. An ear-piercing friction sound that made one's scalp tingle rang out, and the entire research institute became blurry due to the extreme distortion of the air. The strong airflow suddenly stopped with Li Tianlan's voice. The bodies of number 7 and number 8 paused as if they were imprisoned. The whole process took less than a second, but Li Tianlan had already taken action again. He held the spear tightly with both hands. His body rose into the air. He raised the spear over his head and smashed it directly at number 8, who was walking in the front. Destroy. Buddhist incantation of 9 words, destroy formula. It was different from crack. If crack was the strongest outbreak, then destroy was the most ferocious crushing. Meet force with force, go forward with indomitable will. The three shadows followed Li Tianlan and flew up at the same time. 4 long spears fell from above and smashed directly at number 8's head. The confinement effect of the stop formula flashed away. The long spear fell from the air, and number 8 instinctively raised his arms to protect his head. Clang. The moment the silver spear collided with number 8's arms, flesh and blood splashed, but the sound was not a dull sound, but a roar similar to the collision of metals. All the flesh and blood on number 8's arms were completely torn apart, and a pair of alloy arms mixed with flesh and blood appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. The flesh and blood were blurred, and the metal was shining, which looked extremely disgusting. The long spear collided with the arms, and sparks flew everywhere. The distorted air surrounding the two of them spread wildly under the impact of this attack, bringing with it flying dust. The sharp, knife-like shockwave spread out in a circular shape. In the area of more than 10 meters around the three of them, countless utensils exploded one after another, and all kinds of experimental drugs of different colors scattered on the ground. Number 8's face was expressionless, but his body suddenly knelt on the ground under the blow. His weight of at least more than 400 kilograms crashed to the ground. In a blur of smoke and dust, Number 8's huge body was smashed into the ground, and more than half of his body completely sank into the ground. At the moment when the long spear fell on Number 8's arm, before the sparks rose, No. 7 had taken a sudden step forward and punched Li Tianlan hard in the chest. It was an indescribably huge force, violent and surging like a tide. Li Tianlan's face instantly turned pale. He held the long spear tightly in his hand, but his body was directly blasted out. The huge force drove his body to hit the alloy wall of the research institute. The thick alloy steel plate slid down with his body, and a faint human outline was directly imprinted on it. Li Tianlan's eyes blurred, and the whole world was spinning. Everything went black in front of his eyes, and he shook his head fiercely. At the moment when he regained consciousness, he directly spat out a mouthful of blood. His extremely strong aura suddenly weakened, and the palm holding the spear seemed to tremble slightly. Bang! More than 10 meters in front of Li Tianlan, Number 8, whose body had sunk into the ground, suddenly stretched out his hand and hammered the floor beside him. His huge body struggled to stand up from the ground with the sound of metal crashing. His arms had no flesh and blood, but the alloy-covered hands reflected a bright luster, which made people feel cold inside. The next punch will fall on your head. Number 8 clenched his bloody hand and grinned hideously. Ant! Li Tianlan spat out a mouthful of blood again. Then, his eyes narrowed, and his whole body was violent, as if he had fallen into a state of complete anger. He had the wind and thunder veins, the exquisite bone, and the heavenly king heart. He had the strongest inheritance in the dark world for hundreds of years. He entered the thunder-shocking realm at the age of 17. He was the heavenly son of the dark world, not an ant. He still had a long way to go. How could he die here? How dare he die here? Buzz! Li Tianlan suddenly held the long spear in his hand. The 2-meter-long silver spear vibrated slightly and buzzed. He swallowed the blood gushing out of the corner of his mouth, stood up against the wall, and held the human emperor tightly. Are you very good at fighting? He narrowed his eyes, and his tone was calm and soft. Number 7 and Number 8 subconsciously stopped, looked at each other, and seemed to be a little stunned. An indescribable sense of danger emanated from Li Tianlan. He twisted his neck and said with a cold smile, I think I made a mistake. Skills are the most useless to deal with things like you, right? He raised the long spear and said softly, So, now, try again. Number 7 and Number 8, kill him. Dubian Xiangyuan frowned. As an ordinary person who didn't know martial arts, he noticed the strange and dangerous atmosphere. He didn't want to delay it anymore, so he ordered again. Number 7 and Number 8's expressions changed. They suddenly roared and rushed to Li Tianlan. In everyone's sight, Li Tianlan clenched the long spear, also roared, and rushed up without hesitation. Shi Tianmingzi's eyes were dull. In her impression, the newly rising young heavenly son of Zhongzhou State seemed to have always been calm, even indifferent, seemingly soft and calm, but in fact he was prouder than anyone else. His appearance might be very ordinary, but his every move had a deeply hidden but extremely dazzling style. But at this moment, Li Tianlan seemed to be a completely different person. With his roar, his speed was getting faster and faster. He raised the long spear in his hand and rushed to Number 7 and Number 8 without any fancy moves. His eyes seemed to be brighter than ever, and every move seemed to have a kind of violence and fierceness that seemed to fly out from the depths of his soul. Arrogant, wild, and unparalleled. Bang! The distance between the two sides was less than 5 meters. Li Tianlan's shirt was torn in an instant. His bare upper body was covered with a large bruise on his chest, and there was blood flowing down from his waist. But his momentum was getting higher and higher, and the crazy killing intent and fighting intent continued to condense and rise in him, as if there was no end. Clang! Li Tianlan swept his silver spear, and it directly hit the chests of Number 7 and Number 8. In the sound of the metal collision, the two super warriors of the Kusanagi force took 2 steps back at the same time, and each step left a footprint. Li Tianlan's body had already leaped up, and he kicked number 7 in the head. At this moment, Li Tianlan seemed to have given up all martial arts. All he had was strength and speed. Number 7 was kicked in the face, and his body staggered back 7 or 8 meters. In a very short time, Li Tianlan swung his long spear in an arc and directly hit number 8. Clang, clang, clang. In an instant, countless sounds of gold and iron colliding rang out violently and intensely. Li Tianlan's face was expressionless, and his movements were steady and swift. In the blink of an eye, he had hit number 8's arm more than 10 times. The alloy of number 8's arm shook violently, but it did not deform at all. Li Tianlan's eyes were ferocious. If 10 times were not enough, what about 100 times? Number 8's body was almost completely smashed into the ground, and number 7's body rushed back at the same time. But this time, Li Tianlan did not wait for number 7 to approach at all, and his body had already rushed over. He stabbed straight with his spear. With a crisp sound of impact, the slender and sharp spear head directly stabbed number 7's body. In an instant, the muscles of Li Tianlan's bare upper body bulged completely, and he kept exerting his strength. Number 8 tried to stand where he was, but Li Tianlan's strength was getting stronger and stronger, and he directly pushed his body against the wall behind him. Number 8's feet exerted force, and he kept sliding under Li Tianlan's push. His feet rubbed against the ground, and his flesh and blood splashed in an instant, but he seemed to feel nothing. He grasped the tip of the spear with one hand and resisted Li Tianlan's strength. Boom! The long spear drove number 8's body into the alloy wall. In an instant, the long spear shortened into a short stick about 1 meter long. Li Tianlan held the short stick and madly smashed at number 8's body from head to toe. The dense sound of iron striking kept ringing, and pieces of flesh and blood splashed out one after another. Number 8's hands, chest, head, and legs began to show a metallic luster. The human skin seemed to be completely broken by Li Tianlan. Number 8 had become a bloody metal monster. Every muscle on his body was glowing with a cold and strange purple color, which was glued to the metal in his body. Countless light spots flickered on his body, and his resistance became more and more fierce. Crack! Li Tianlan's ribs were broken by number 8. Under the severe pain, his strength weakened slightly. Number 8 had already taken a step forward, strode forward, and directly hit Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, who was almost covered in blood, was knocked away on the spot. In the roar, number 7, who had climbed up from the ground again, suddenly caught Li Tianlan's body. He swung him wildly to the other side of the laboratory. A silver light flashed in the laboratory. The human emperor flew out of Li Tianlan's hand and fell in the corner. Li Tianlan's body smashed 2 experiment tables and slammed into the wall. But before number 7 and number 8 could react, his body flashed and appeared in front of them again. His aura seemed weak, but his whole body was full of a kind of desperate heat and madness. "Go on," he said, and his hands shook. After the human emperor left his hands, a huge icicle appeared directly in his hands. The icicle kept extending, and in an instant, it had become a huge pillar with a diameter of 1 meter and a length of more than 10 meters. All of Li Tianlan's reasons seemed to have completely disappeared. His eyes flashed, full of fanatical fighting intent. He held the icicle with both hands and suddenly swept it across. There was only Li Tianlan's completely crazy roar in the whole laboratory. He grabbed the icicle, which was already 20 meters long, and directly swept it on number 7 and number 8. It had nothing to do with power. The huge volume of the icicle directly swept number 7 and number 8 away. This overbearing and eccentric weapon whistled violently in the air. As the icicle swept past, all the instruments and lights in the laboratory that blocked its attack route exploded in an instant, and countless sparks burst. The icicle in Li Tianlan's hand danced wildly, and everything in the laboratory was completely broken. Everyone stared at the scene with their mouths agape. Shi Tianmingzi finally saw what a real young chosen one was. It was not only combat effectiveness, but also absolutely vigorous and unflinching fighting will. This absolutely overbearing and violent battle looked so cold, but the chosen one of Xianxia state not far away was so fanatical. In the desperate situation of life and death, Shi Tianmingzi's eyes were blurred, and even her lower body was a little wet. For the first time, she even felt that her father's words before leaving made some sense. If she could rely on the Samsara Palace through Li Tianlan, then even if she had some intimate relations with Li Tianlan behind her husband's back, it was definitely worth it, although it was not chaste. The huge icicles swept past, and in the countless bursting sparks, number 7 and number 8 waved their fists at the same time. Both of them were also bloody, but they were still vigorous. The huge icicle shattered in an instant. But the icicle in Li Tianlan's hand gathered together again in the explosion and extended again. Li Tianlan went all out. The icicle in his hand expanded in an instant, and its diameter exceeded 5 meters in the blink of an eye. An icicle across the whole laboratory was formed again. Li Tianlan held the icicle high with both hands. He raised his arms to the sky. Boom! The icicle rotated in Li Tianlan's roar, and the lights of the whole laboratory flickered violently. All the instruments, computers, utensils, statues, and clocks were completely broken. The bodies of number 7 and number 8 had been knocked against the wall. Dubian Xiangyuan, who had been watching the situation nervously, changed his face dramatically. He suddenly reached out and pointed at Li Tianlan, shouting, "Number 9, kill him, quick!" Number 9 took a step forward. At the same time, the icicle in Li Tianlan's hand was once again broken by number 7 and number 8. The whole laboratory was stirred by the icicle, and the circuit system was completely destroyed. At the moment the icicle broke, the laboratory suddenly fell into darkness. Number 9's forward body suddenly stopped. Number 7 and number 8, who rushed to Li Tianlan, also froze in place, motionless, like dead things. Li Tianlan froze for a moment and waved his hands subconsciously. A fire lit up. In the fire, 3 super warriors of the Kusanagi force were frozen in place, and the light on their bodies had completely disappeared. General Fujiwara Ping, the top leader of the Divine Wind Force, stood together with Dubian Xiangyuan, looking pale and desperate. Shi Tianmingzi was stunned and then ecstatic. She rushed to Li Tianlan's side and said in surprise, "Mr. Tianlan, the Kusanagi force is short of energy. I know, we came in very suddenly, and Dubian Xiangyuan had no time to replenish the energy of the Kusanagi force. Their previous battle had been supported by electricity. If we kill Dubian Xiangyuan, our task will be completed." This battle was so fierce that if it continued, no one knew what the result would be. Now this dramatic change was a complete surprise for Shi Tianmingzi. Li Tianlan remained calm and said flatly, "Kill Dubian Xiangyuan? I suddenly changed my mind. He is more useful alive than dead." He narrowed his eyes, looked at the thunder-shocking realm master beside Dubian Xiangyuan who had lost his combat power, and said calmly, "Who is that?" Shi Tianmingzi's body was close to Li Tianlan, and she said quickly, "That is Fujiwara Ping, the top leader of the Divine Wind Force." Chapter 151. Take Dubian Xiangyuan away and kill Tingyuan Ping. Shi Tianmingzi's body was slightly stiff. She looked at Li Tianlan, who stood in front of her with a calm face, with a complicated look in her eyes. The state of this young heavenly son of Xianxia state was obviously very bad now. His face was pale and he was covered in blood. His aura was constantly fluctuating, from the peak to the trough, and then from the low to the peak. It seemed extremely unstable. But he stood there quietly, and there was a clear fighting intent that went straight into the sky. His injury was extremely serious, but Shi Tianmingzi had no doubt that Li Tianlan could fight again. The Kusanagi force had been implanted with a large number of alloys, and there were also control chips inside. From this point of view, although these super soldiers still had sober consciousness, they could no longer be called human beings. They were more like metal monsters. Once they were awakened with sufficient energy, they could even maintain their peak state before they were completely destroyed. However, the Kusanagi force of the Black Sun Institute was obviously short of energy, which was a blessing in misfortune. Was it a blessing? Shi Tianmingzi thought in a daze. It should be like this, right? But why was there no joy of surviving a disaster in her heart? Countless sparks flickered in the space of the laboratory, and the light was flickering. Shi Tianmingzi's mind was full of the battle just now. It was a real tragic battle, a real battle to the death. Li Tianlan, who had completely lost his calmness, seemed to exude an invincible will that could make everyone kneel on the ground. It was indescribable fierceness and dominance, like a god descending to the world, like the god of war coming to the world, moving forward with indomitable will and never retreat. What would be the result if they continued to fight? In Shi Tianmingzi's mind, the Kusanagi force was an absolutely invincible team. But at this moment, she suddenly found that for the follow-up of this battle, if they continued to fight, she actually thought that Li Tianlan would not necessarily lose. Shi Tianmingzi looked at Li Tianlan in a daze, and her eyes were in a trance. This was a man who looked calm but hid all the crazy and strong aggression in his bones. After removing his disguise, his every move seemed to reveal a kind of almost dazzling dominance and indifference. This feeling was so majestic that it was almost irresistible. Shi Tianmingzi subconsciously took a step forward, but she hesitated. "Why are you hesitating?" Li Tianlan asked calmly. The blood on his body was still flowing, but he could clearly feel that the speed of the blood flow was getting slower and slower. His internal organs seemed to be torn apart. After the burning pain, he felt cool like a clear spring. The vitality contained in the immortality potion still played a role. Although it could not make him recover immediately, at least it could keep his injury from continuing to deteriorate uncontrollably. Shi Tianmingzi gritted her teeth and walked forward quickly. Kill Tingyuan Ping and leave Dubian Xiangyuan alive. The latter was Li Tianlan's temporary change of mind, while the former, to some extent, could also be regarded as a pledge of allegiance that she handed over to Li Tianlan. Although such a pledge of allegiance could not play a big role, at least it could not play a big role in the general trend of the two countries. For her personally, the strength of this pledge of allegiance was quite significant. There was a big difference between having it and not having it. Shi Tianmingzi moved forward. He continued to advance through the pile of ruins. His figure was elegant, but his killing intent was overflowing. Dubian Xiangyuan, covered in blood and with a pale face, subconsciously supported Tingyuan Ping, who had lost his combat power, and kept retreating. His eyes widened, and he still stared at the three soldiers of the Kusanagi force who had been motionless. He muttered in Japanese in a daze, "Impossible, impossible." Although every super soldier of the Kusanagi force needed to replenish energy, Dubian Xiangyuan, as one of the main creators of the Kusanagi force, knew very well that although the three super soldiers were short of energy to wake up the Kusanagi force this time, they did not completely rely on electricity. The energy in each of them was enough for them to fight for at least an hour. But how long did they fight with Li Tianlan? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? In such a short period of time, their energy had been completely depleted? Damn it! Just how intense was the battle? Shi Tianmingzi sighed slightly, reached out her hand, and said softly, "Doctor, come with me. For the sake of our previous relationship, as long as you cooperate with me, I can guarantee that you will not be hurt." Both the Black Sun Institute and Shitian Financial Group once belonged to Night Spirit, so Shi Tianmingzi was no stranger to Dubian Xiangyuan. They could even be said to be very familiar with each other. Dubian Xiangyuan looked at Shi Tianmingzi in a daze and was silent. After a long time, the corner of his mouth moved, and he said in a dry voice, "You, Shi Tianmingzi." Before Dubian Xiangyuan's voice died away, Tingyuan Ping's furious roar suddenly sounded. "Do you know what you are doing? This is treason. The whole Shitian clan will not be forgiven. Traitors should die." The superior at the peak of the thundershocking realm, who had lost his combat power after fighting with Li Tianlan without any fancy moves in a short time, struggled and tried to stand in front of Dubian Xiangyuan. His face was ferocious, and his eyes were full of undisguised hatred. "Do you Shitian Financial Group want to be the shame of East Island? The Divine Wind Force will not let you go. Any traitor will die under the sharp blade of the Divine Wind Force." Shi Tianmingzi silently looked at the general of East Island, who looked a little crazy in front of her, and there was a kind of obvious sadness and disappointment in her eyes. Ting Yuanping, an important figure in the East Island militarist group, was one of the top leaders of the Divine Wind Force. Compared to his position, his strength was not outstanding. The reason why he could get this position today was because of his loyalty. His almost fanatical loyalty to East Island. From the standpoint of East Island, Ting Yuanping might not have done well for many years, but it was hard for others to say anything bad about him. Although he was the backbone of the militarist group, that was just his idea. After joining the Divine Wind Force for many years, he had never participated in the internal intrigue of East Island, whether it was the game between Night Spirit and the East Island government, or the undercurrent between the government and the royal family. Ting Yuanping had always been neutral. Among all the generals in East Island, he could be said to be the poorest one. He drove an ordinary domestic Toyota, lived in an apartment less than 100 meters away, was not greedy for money, not lecherous, and lived alone. All kinds of medals he got over the years almost covered half of the wall. He had never participated in the civil war of East Island, but in foreign battles he always took the lead, rushed the fastest, and retreated the slowest. He was a very pure soldier, loyal, fearless, and hot-blooded. The major groups in East Island were also intertwined, but Ting Yuanping of the militarist group was a rare figure who could be respected by all parties. In his own words, for more than 20 years, since he joined the East Island Divine Wind Force, every drop of blood on his body had been shed with a clear conscience. A real soldier. Or a real hero. At least in the hearts of the people of East Island, Ting Yuanping was like this. Even Ting Yuanping himself didn't know that the daughter of Shitian Financial Group, who was standing in front of him at this time and was about to attack him, had regarded him as an idol a few years ago. Mr. Ting, Shigen Mingzi spoke softly, and a long sword made of ice took shape in her hand. It was crystal clear and chilling. You are a hero, and you should have a heroic ending, but I'm sorry. She whispered, and the long sword in her hand shook. The cold sword blade pierced into Ting Yuanping's chest and went through his chest. Shigen Mingzi's hand holding the sword trembled slightly. Because of excitement, her face was obviously flushed, which looked gorgeous and enchanting. Ting Yuanping calmed down, and his eyes were fixed on Shigen Mingzi, without blinking. The long sword that pierced his chest began to melt. His body shook slightly, and he struggled to point in the direction of Li Tianlan. Then he looked at Shigen Mingzi and said in a hoarse voice, "Enemies, traitors, all deserve to die. The people of East Island." Before he finished his words, his body shook and fell directly to the ground. Shitian Mingzi took a deep breath, trembling all over, and bowed deeply to Ting Yuanping. Then she grabbed Dubian Xiangyuan's collar almost violently and dragged his body directly to Li Tianlan in the doctor's constant struggle. "You did a good job," Li Tianlan said in a calm tone. When he said this, he had picked up the human emperor and the box containing the sky attack. The silver metal box was opened. Li Tianlan took the syringe and injected a tube of pale red liquid into his arm. The strong fighting intent in his body had disappeared, and his breath had become stable. Shitian Mingzi looked at Li Tianlan indifferently and said in a stiff tone, "We have to leave here immediately. What are you going to do with Dubian Xiangyuan? Give him to Zhongzhou State?" Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes subconsciously and looked at Dubian Xiangyuan seriously. Dubian Xiangyuan looked about 60 years old. Because he did research all year round, his actual age should be younger. A large amount of blood stained his clothes and face at this time. In his struggle, Li Tianlan could not see his specific appearance. The only impression he had was that his glasses were very thick. "Let me go. What do you want to do?" Bang! Li Tianlan suddenly stretched out his hand and knocked the doctor out. His eyes were narrowed, but there was a very complicated light in them. Shitian Mingzi could even clearly see the brightness in his eyes. It was a kind of look that she was familiar with. It was fanatical and eager. To be exact, it was called ambition. "He wants to stay," Li Tianlan said calmly. "How about handing him over to Shitian Financial Group for the time being?" Shitian Mingzi's heart moved. She was keenly aware of the subtle position of the heavenly son of Zhongzhou State. She just nodded silently, thoughtfully. Li Tianlan found a snow-white research suit in the laboratory and put it on. Then he walked out of the door. The space of the institute outside the laboratory was dark. In the silent atmosphere, Li Tianlan could even clearly hear the suppressed and frightened gasps in the rooms on both sides. Li Tianlan walked into the elevator with no expression on his face. His goal was Dubian Xianxia. As for the other minions in the institute, he had no interest in killing them at all. And the time did not allow it. He walked into the elevator and looked at the time in the elevator screen. It had been 20 minutes since they entered the Black Sun Institute. The time that the Shitian clan used the instrument to shield all nearby communication signals was 30 minutes. They had to leave as soon as possible. The elevator went straight up from the second floor. In the elevator, Li Tianlan suddenly said, "Let your people come down later and carry number 9 up. Hurry up." Shitian Mingzi carried Dubian Xiangyuan and agreed. Number 9 had been guarding Dubian Xiangyuan all the time. There were no scars on his body. From the research point of view, number 9 was undoubtedly the most complete. Carrying Dubian Xiangyuan's body, Shitian Mingzi suddenly thought of Li Tianlan's eyes, which were as hot as a wildfire that could burn everything. Could it be that this man wanted to create a super army of his own? East Island has the Kusanagi force. Mingzi, is there a similar super force in Zhongzhou State? The elevator entered the first floor. Li Tianlan and Shitian Mingzi went all the way up and returned to the main hall of Sensoji. They didn't stop and went straight out of the temple. Shitian Mingzi glanced at him with a strange look in her eyes. She was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "There must be." And the super force of Zhongzhou State, even if it is not the most powerful in the world, is definitely one of the most powerful super forces. Technically speaking, East Island and Zhongzhou State are at a great disadvantage. She paused and continued, "It's just that I don't know the code name of the super force of Zhongzhou State. In fact, if Shitian Financial Group didn't decide to go all out, I wouldn't even know the Kusanagi force." Li Tianlan nodded and was silent in thought. The two stepped through the front hall and went straight out of the gate of Sensoji. In their sight, 100 meters away, several off-road vehicles were still parked there quietly, without any movement. Shitian Mingzi frowned, quickened her pace a little, and approached the off-road team. In the night, the team was quiet. The distance of 30 meters was enough for people inside and outside the car to see everything clearly, but the team was still motionless, and no one got off to greet them. Li Tianlan and Shitian Mingzi's hearts sank at the same time, and they stopped subconsciously. "How could you appear here?" A soft, almost charming voice suddenly sounded in the night wind, surrounding the ears of Li Tianlan and Shitian Mingzi. "So, Shitian clan is going to commit treason, right?" Li Tianlan and Shitian Mingzi tightened their bodies at the same time. In their sight, 30 meters away, on the roof of the off-road team at the forefront, the quiet air suddenly stirred under the starry sky. The air was like a wave, spreading layer by layer like ripples. The research suit on Li Tianlan's body fluttered backward in the surging air, and Shitian Mingzi's long hair fluttered backward in the ripple-like airwaves. In front of the silent Sensoji, the wind suddenly blew. On the roof of the off-road vehicle, a bright red female figure suddenly appeared. She looked at Shitian Mingzi, frowned slightly, and then her calm eyes fell directly on Li Tianlan. It was a young woman who looked to be at most 25 or 26 years old. She was at most 1.6 meters tall, and her figure was extremely petite. Her black hair was soft and smooth, and her face, in particular, could be said to be extremely charming. She wore a fiery red dress that was like a raging flame, and as the skirt fluttered, it revealed a pair of smooth, white, and tender thighs. Her entire body emitted an extremely charming yet dangerous temptation. Beautiful legs, dressed in red, she stood quietly on the roof of the car, but exuded an aggressive and enchanting beauty, charming and wild. Among all the women Li Tianlan had seen since he entered the secular world, Qin Weibai was one, Wang Yuetong was half a goddess, and the woman in red in front of him could also be regarded as half a goddess. She was extremely beautiful and charming. A stunner? No, she was an enemy. Li Tianlan's eyes were always clear. He stared at the woman in red tens of meters away with a cold expression. The woman appeared here. There was no doubt that the elites of Xianxia clan outside had all been killed. Li Tianlan? The woman in red stood on the roof of the car and tilted her head. Tilting her head, the biting cold wind continued to spread with her as the core. Her fine black hair and red dress fluttered in the wind, making her look even more extraordinary and refined. Teacher said he would kill you in person. The woman in red looked at Li Tianlan and said seriously, but I don't think you deserve to be killed by him. So I'm here. Li Tianlan's body became more and more tense, and he said coldly, kill me? Do you deserve it? The woman in red smiled and said, you have young heavenly sons in Xianxia state. Do you think? She abruptly raised a small white hand. A delicate folding fan with a fragrance moved like lightning. The blade of the fan opened and rushed directly to Li Tianlan. The cold wind in the air suddenly stopped, and the bright fire that could almost illuminate the sky spread instantly from her body. In an instant, the whole world seemed to be covered by the raging flames that rose to the sky. The folding fan in the air trembled wildly, and the soft, charming, and somewhat sweet voice of the woman in red continued, do you think that East Island doesn't have any? There were young heavenly sons in Xianxia state, but there were none in East Island? Before the voice fell, the body of the woman in red had appeared directly in front of Li Tianlan. She reached out and grabbed the folding fan. The raging flame and the cold wind rose to the sky at the same time. But her hands suddenly chopped down. The blade of the fan opened and closed. The dangerous edge was waved in an instant, unscrupulous. Shitian Mingzi carried Dubby and Xiangyuan and turned to run without hesitation. She jumped out of the sea of fire with the old doctor on her shoulder and screamed, Tianlunjun, kill her! She is the young heavenly son of East Island, my Shiranui. Li Tianlan switched places with his shadow in an instant. But before he could stand firm, the attack of the woman in red had come to him again. His red robe fluttered in the raging flames. All the flames were dancing wildly. Chapter 152. June 14th. The storm was still raging in every corner of Dongdu. The rain columns connecting the sky and the earth were flying all over the sky, roaring in the violent wind. The entire Dongdu in the storm gave people a dangerous feeling of lingering on death's door. It seemed to be affected by the weather. The atmosphere inside the whole East Island seemed to become gloomy and depressing in the storm. The storm hit Dongdu. But the real storm had swept the whole East Island within dozens of hours. Chaos came as expected. Like an ignited explosive, as the fuse burned to the end, the calm situation suddenly broke out in a nearly overturned state. Countless flames rose to the sky, blood and flesh flew everywhere. In a very short time, the whole East Island seemed to be filled with a violent and messy beauty. 6:40 in the morning. Ninghu, the director of the intelligence department of Yamaguchi-gumi, disappeared on his way to the headquarters. 7:15 in the morning. Dongdu. Senior counselor Kyakuwa-do also walked out of his house and got into his own car. The car didn't even travel 200 meters before it exploded violently. The surging flames completely engulfed everything around it. The driver, the bodyguards, and even Kyakuwa-do himself were all turned into a pile of charcoal in the violent explosion. 7:30 in the morning. Dongdu. In less than a day after the chaos subsided, several mysterious superiors led a team to raid Takeshita Street. Countless special warfare agencies suffered heavy losses before they could react. Several leaders of special warfare agencies were killed. The scene was horrible. 8 o'clock in the morning. Fuyong Peak, the holy mountain. The divine wind force finally responded. The first group of 50 elites just went down the mountain. They were ambushed before they even walked out of the foot of the mountain. The 50 elites of the divine wind force were all wiped out. Their vehicles rolled down the mountain. It looked like a traffic accident. The storm was still heavy. From 8 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the whole East Island, Dongdu, Ninghu, Changdao, Xiantai, Mingwu, Jubin, Bingang, Jingzhong, Futai, in countless areas, all kinds of accidents and attacks appeared one after another. People from all walks of life died or disappeared because of all kinds of accidents. In less than a day, the whole East Island fell into a chaotic situation that had never been seen in decades. Blood was everywhere. Dead people were everywhere. This kind of continuous assassination and attacks seemed to have no sign of stopping. As time went by, this series of bloody assassinations was bound to continue. On this day, it did not feel like the collision of the Dark World at all, but the prelude to a world war. A large number of assassinations involved various domains, including the royal family, the political circle, the military, business and finance, the underworld, the special warfare system, various consortiums, and various shrines. A large number of assassins hidden in the dark seemed to have no specific target at all. In other words, anyone who was influential in a certain field could be said to be their target. All aspects of East Island took action. The police, the military, the special warfare system, and the underworld forces all responded immediately. After a lot of bloody assassinations, the whole East Island seemed to be moving toward a more chaotic direction. The Island. On the third day after all the elites of Xianxia State sneaked into East Island safely, the special warfare system of Xianxia State finally showed its sharpest and coldest fangs on the land of this neighboring country. The vehicles from the royal family and the cabinet once again headed straight for Furong Peak. The two top aides, Xianxia and Xin, who represented the will of the Mikado and the Prime Minister respectively, went straight to the Divine Wind Force to meet the only superior of the invincible realm in East Island, Supreme Ninja Shinichi Miyamoto. At the same time, in the Azure Pool Hot Spring Club, an internal meeting was also being held. It's not big enough. In the conference room, Tribulation, dressed in black, sat in the main seat. His first sentence shocked everyone. Not all the people in the conference room were in the conference room. Many of them were still outside and hadn't come back yet. But obviously, Tribulation didn't want to wait any longer. He looked at the list in his hand and frowned slightly. After a few seconds of silence, he said in a low and hoarse voice, "Who can tell me what's going on?" What Tribulation held in his hand was an extremely long list. The densely packed names were arranged on the A4 paper in his hand, and there were even more than one page. At a rough glance, there were at least hundreds of people on the list. However, many of the names had been crossed out, which was the mark of death. But compared with this part of the people, there were obviously more people who had not been crossed out. Tribulation frowned and looked at it for a while. Then he threw the list on the table in front of him and said lightly, "Everyone, is that all we can do?" It's a little strange. Yi Fengqing sat next to Tribulation, looking a little distressed. He rubbed his forehead, as if he didn't know how to express himself. These people are collected by Director Han over the years. It can be said to be a very important list. In theory, if we kill all these people, East Island will be in chaos for a while. But now the situation is that we have the list and the information, but many people can't be found. He took the list on the table and sighed. Here, these are the people. It's so strange. There are a lot of people here, especially some masters of the special warfare system. After we rushed over, we couldn't see them at all. At most, we killed a few small fries. It was useless to torture them, because even those people didn't know where the target went. I really doubt whether they are masters or cowards. As for the others, there are a lot of guts, such as the vice president of the bank, and the chairman of the board of directors. They can be found easily, but some masters have disappeared inexplicably. As Yi Fengqing spoke, he lit a cigarette. After looking around, he said helplessly, "Is there anyone who has encountered the same thing as me?" Tribulation raised his eyebrows and glanced at the others. There weren't many people sitting at this conference table now. To be exact, there were only 4, including Tribulation. As the strongest master that Xianxia State put in East Island, Tribulation didn't participate in the series of assassinations outside. His eyes were fixed on Fu Peak all the time. The other 3 people, Yi Fengqing, Flaming Fire, and Xianxia, were not idle. Bai Yuming, Horsewoman, and the Enchantress hadn't come back yet. Everyone was on the move. After Yi Fengqing went out once, the situation he encountered was a little strange. Tribulation looked at Flaming Fire and Gu Yunxia and asked, "What about you?" "Almost the same." Gu Yunxia frowned and said in a low voice. Among the first group of elites from Xianxia state who sneaked into East Island, Gu Yunxia could be said to be the representative. Although she and Tribulation had a sharp stand, she could still distinguish the basic situation outside Xianxia state. "I also went to a few places. Some of them were fruitful, but some of them were empty, especially the masters of the special warfare system. No one was in their bases or at home. It seemed that they had been away for a while. As for some people in other fields, they also have a wide range of activities, so it's normal that they can't be found. But how could the masters of the special warfare system disappear inexplicably?" Several people at the table narrowed their eyes almost at the same time. "I'm from East Island, so I'm more familiar with this place than you guys. What I encountered was similar. I often couldn't find anyone, and I also went to a few places where they were most likely to go, but they were also empty. It's said that some of them haven't been here for a while." Flaming Fire took a deep breath and looked serious. The helpless expression on Yi Fengqing's face suddenly became serious. Today was the first day of action, and he missed a few targets. He thought it was his bad luck, but this kind of situation happened to everyone. Obviously, there was an inside story. And these were all masters of the special warfare system. If they suddenly disappeared, where could they go? And where could they go? Have they left East Island? Yi Fengqing took a big drag on his cigarette and said suddenly. Flaming Fire was stunned and said subconsciously, "If they're not in East Island, where can they go?" The conference room suddenly became quiet. Several people looked at each other and thought of a possibility at the same time. "Those lunatics from Xianxia state are crazy. Their actions are too big. Do they want to start a world war? Your Highness Miyamoto, now only you can punish them. We think it's time to send out all the Divine Wind Force to maintain the stability of the special warfare system of East Island." At the same time, in the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force. In the conference room, the top advisor of the royal family, Song Xiaoying, paced back and forth and shouted excitedly. When Song Xiaoying, who had always been calm and gentle, almost completely lost his composure, Zhua Hengxin sat aside in silence. He just looked at Shinichi Miyamoto, who sat opposite him, without saying a word. In less than a day, nearly 200 people were assassinated. And it wasn't just 200 people who were insignificant. Every one of the victims had a sensitive identity, more or less. It was easy to imagine how chaotic East Island was. East Island had always been one of the countries with the strongest special warfare system. It was the first time in decades that such a chaotic situation had happened. It was a great shame. The Divine Wind Force was the power center of the special warfare system of East Island. If they didn't take action now, when would they? At present, we can basically confirm it. Feeling Song Xiaoying's excitement, Shinichi Miyamoto, whose face was still covered by a black scarf, said in a calm tone, "Now a large number of elites of Xianxia state have sneaked into East Island. What happened today can be said to be Xianxia state's provocation to East Island." "Your Highness Miyamoto." Zhua Hengxin suddenly opened his mouth. His tone was still respectful, but there was a hint of toughness in it. "In fact, we don't want to listen to any analysis. What the royal family and the cabinet need most is how to solve the current situation. East Island must be stable, and all the enemies must be eliminated." "Of course." Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes flashed inexplicably. He said blandly, "In fact, compared to the Mikado and the Prime Minister, I'm more anxious. But I have to stay rational." He stood up from his seat, and his powerful momentum instantly filled the whole conference room. So far, Xianxia State has a big plan. It seems that they not only want the power of Night Spirit in East Island, but also want to severely damage the special warfare system of East Island. No, they have already started to do that. Strength and appetite are relative. Since Xianxia State dares to do this, it means that they will put a lot of power into East Island this time. And to be honest, I'm in a dilemma now. Zhua Hengxin and Song Xiaoying fell silent at the same time. Dilemma. Of course they knew why Shinichi Miyamoto was in a dilemma. What happened today was the most chaotic situation in East Island in recent decades. But at the same time, the special warfare system of East Island was also the weakest in recent decades. They were not weak. But too much power was not in East Island at all. Instead, they had sneaked into Xianxia State. They are in Xianxia State? After a short silence, Yi Fengqing finally spoke. His tone was not shock or fear, but incredulity. So many people. Are they not in East Island but all in Xianxia State? Are the Japanese tired of living? Craziness and perverseness are in the genes of East Islanders. The battle between Castellan and Samsara tomorrow will attract a lot of attention. I think not only East Island, but other forces will also send a lot of elites into Xianxia State. If it's a life-and-death battle tomorrow, after the battle, these foreign forces may take the opportunity to deal a fatal blow to the special warfare system of Xianxia State. For those who don't know the inside story, they will definitely bet on such a good opportunity. Gu Yunxia glanced at flaming fire beside her, and then said with a poker face. This is really. Yi Fengqing's smile was very complicated, with excitement, joy, and a trace of disbelief. Everyone knew that East Island would definitely send people to Xianxia State. But Yi Fengqing did not expect that there would be so many people. The masters of the special warfare system on the list alone were a very strong force. Together with Tianhai Wuji and Lu Xingcangquan, two superiors of the invincible realm in Xianxia State, it could be said that East Island put more than half of its elites in Xianxia State this time. How crazy was this decision? It was simply the courage of a moron. But if he thought about it carefully, the reason why East Island dared to bet might be that the resentment between Samsara and Kunlun City was real. If the battle tomorrow was really a lose-lose situation, it was really hard to say how much effect East Island's force would play. And it could be foreseen that not only East Island, but also the Jiang family, Knights Templars, and Fantasy World would also send elites into Xianxia State. If these forces were added together, it would be really terrible. Xianxia State must be a gathering of storms now. But tomorrow's battle was destined to have no big loss, so Yi Fengqing had nothing to worry about. In that case, our trip to East Island can be more relaxed. Yi Fengqing smiled and said softly, "Don't be careless." Tribulation glanced at Yi Fengqing and shook his head. After all, this is East Island. Integrate the resources of East Island? In the Divine Wind Force, Zhua Hengxin looked at Shinichi Miyamoto in front of him in disbelief. It's the only way. Shinichi Miyamoto's tone was cold and firm. This is our home field, but now it's hard for me to be sure that we have the upper hand. God knows how many people Xianxia State has invested in East Island. Sidu Cangyue? Gu Qianchuan? These are all uncertain factors. We have a lot of superiors of the Thundershocking realm who have sneaked into Xianxia State. Now facing the power of Xianxia State, do we have to rely on the elites of the Divine Wind Force to fight? I need superiors. Xianxia State is only a few hours away from East Island. Maybe we can call back some of the superiors of Xianxia State, Song Xiaoying said hesitantly. Before he finished, he smiled bitterly. Call back. Shinichi Miyamoto nodded. That's a good idea. But can they come back now? He turned around and looked at the snow on Few Peak through the glass of the conference room. He said expressionlessly, if the final battle between the master of Samsara Palace and the god of war of Xianxia State is a trap, then all of us in Xianxia State may become the bargaining chips in the hands of the opponent. They may come back, but not now. Song Xiaoying sighed deeply and suddenly felt powerless. When the news of the final battle in Xianxia State first spread, how many people thought it was fake? It was about the ranking on the divine list and the rise and growth of the Samsara Palace. It was about the political situation of Xianxia State and the overall situation of the Dark World. Plus, Qin Weibai's man was Li Tianlan. All kinds of reasons seemed to prove the authenticity and seriousness of this battle. The scheme set up by Samsara Palace and Xianxia State might not be flawless, but everyone saw a beautiful future. The huge benefits made them instinctively ignore the possible risks. But now that they thought about it, the master of Samsara Palace destroyed Night Spirit, and what she was after was definitely more than a murderous weapon. It seemed wiser to join forces with Xianxia state to plot against East Island. But they ignored this at that time. This mistake was so serious that it directly pushed the whole East Island into an extremely embarrassing situation. Now, it was useless to inform Tianhai Wuji and Lu Xingzangquan. It was better to let them calm down and watch the battle before considering other things. Integrate the resources of all systems and concentrate our strength to fight against the enemy. At least we can't give the enemy a chance to break us one by one. At the same time, I propose again that we completely wake up the Kusanagi force and take out all the forces we can use. In this situation, we have no time. Shinichi Miyamoto's tone became more and more indifferent. No time? Song Xiaoying asked subconsciously and then said with a wry smile, as far as I know, even if the Mikado and Mr. Prime Minister agree to integrate the resources, it will take more than 1 or 2 days. Special cases, special cases. Shinichi Miyamoto shook his head. We don't have to integrate all the resources. As long as our strength can destroy the enemy, that's enough. After all, this is East Island. Please tell the Prime Minister and the Mikado that this is a war of the Dark World, but not only a war of the Dark World. At the critical moment, I need their full support. Song Xiaoying and Zhua Hengxin straightened up at the same time and bowed deeply. Yes. Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and suddenly said, how about the Kusanagi force of the Black Sun Institute? 2 soldiers are damaged more than 35%. They can join the battle after repair. It will take about a week. Song Xiaoying said slowly, Your Highness Miyamoto, the Mikado agreed to wake up all the Kusanagi force in principle. I think the royal family will give a clear attitude when I go back. Shinichi Miyamoto nodded, narrowed his eyes, and said thoughtfully, Shitian Financial Group? Shitian Ningji has released a statement, saying that he and Shitian Mingzi are no longer father and daughter and expelled her from Shitian Financial Group. At present, Shitian Mingzi has become a traitor, and the royal family has sent an elite team to rescue Dr. Watanabe. Song Xiaoying's tone was flat, but when he mentioned Shitian Financial Group, there was a trace of coldness and killing intent in his tone. Shinichi Miyamoto nodded and said with a smile, Dr. Watanabe will be fine. The royal rescue team doesn't need to follow too closely. If everything goes well, they will all appear here. He reached out his hand and pointed at the map of East Island on the conference table, his eyes deep. This is... The 2 aides representing the royal family and the office of the Prime Minister looked over subconsciously, their eyes confused. The place of the final battle. Shinichi Miyamoto said calmly. Bang! In the serious and depressing discussion, the door of the conference room was suddenly pushed open. Han Shishuan, who had hidden in East Island for many years and controlled all the intelligence, hurried in. His expression was calm, but his eyes showed a sense of exasperation and anxiety. Everyone's heart suddenly sank. What's wrong? Tribulation's eyes instantly focused and he said in a deep voice. Something happened. Han Shishuan's calm face became a little pale. At present, it can be confirmed that Wang Xingxiao, Li Tianlan, and Gu Hanshan are all in danger. The 3 of them have all lost contact. Before he finished speaking, everyone's expression changed dramatically. Almost all the experts present had taken action, so the work of contacting Wang Xingxiao, Li Tianlan, and the others was handed over to Han Shishuan's people. No one expected that in less than 2 days the 3 young heavenly sons, who were likely to represent the strongest combat force in Xianxia state in the future, had all lost contact. What the hell happened? Tribulation subconsciously clenched his fists, but his tone became calmer. It's not clear now. I'm asking people to collect intelligence. The only news I got now is that Tianlan is very likely to encounter the Kusanagi force in Sensoji. As for Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan, there's no news for the time being. Han Shishuan's tone was heavy, and his heart was almost twisted. He knew very well what these 3 young people meant to the future of Xianxia state. If something happened to these 3 people, Han Shishuan's mouth twitched, and he didn't dare to continue thinking for a moment. Kusanagi force. Tribulation, Yi Fengqing, Gu Yunxia, and Flaming Fire stood up at the same time. How could the Kusanagi force appear in the Black Sun Institute? It's our fault. We didn't collect enough intelligence. We didn't expect that such a precious superforce would appear in the Black Sun Institute. We underestimated the importance of the Black Sun Institute before, so the accident happened. Damn it. The more Han Shishuan said, the angrier he became. At last, he couldn't help cursing. Swish. Before he finished speaking, Flaming Fire's body had directly rushed out of the conference room with lightning. The Kusanagi force. Given the status of these people present, they were no strangers to the name of the Kusanagi force. What they lacked was their understanding of the Kusanagi force. This superforce, which combined biotechnology and high-tech, was definitely more difficult to deal with than most experts. It was a real killing machine. Li Tunlan should have encountered the Kusanagi force. For a moment, the whole conference room fell into a dead silence. What about Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan? Yi Fengcheng was silent for a while and suddenly asked. Han Shishuan shook his head and said with a gloomy expression, "We're still investigating. There's no news for the time being." The look in Yi Fengcheng's eyes changed, and he subconsciously glanced at Tribulation. Gu Yunxiao wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Tribulation stood in front of the conference table and was silent for a full 5 minutes. Then he said in a low voice, "Let all our people take action and find a way to find them. After getting in touch with them, we can confirm their status. If you want to find them, you can leave Dongdu. Find them first." Leave Dongdu. Yi Fengcheng frowned and muttered to himself. No one knew what he was thinking. This should also be the plan of the East Island government. Obviously, they already know of our existence and have taken the 3 young heavenly sons as a breakthrough point. They intend to use them as bargaining chips to force us to leave Dongdu. Han Shishuan said quickly, "It seems that East Island has reacted, and they have even begun to choose the place of the final battle." The place of the final battle? Zhua Hengxin looked at the map with a strange look in his eyes, looking at Shinichi Miyamoto's indifferent eyes. Why here? Anywhere is fine. As long as it's not Dongdu. Shinichi Miyamoto shook his head. At present, it seems that this is the most suitable place. Shi Tianmingzi defected to Li Tianlan. She brought Dr. Watanabe, so she must meet with Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, Wang Shengxiao, and Gu Hanshan were the 3 strongest young heavenly sons in Zhongzhou State. They all had huge forces behind them. As long as they were forced here, all the forces of Zhongzhou State would also gather here. They couldn't give up these 3 people, absolutely not. So we only need to use a small amount of forces to track their whereabouts and put all the integrated forces into the final battle. The right time, right place, and right people are on our side, and we will be the final winner. In this case, Song Xiaoying pondered and said respectfully, "Please forgive me for being presumptuous. Your Highness, if this is really so simple, why don't you do it yourself? As long as you personally..." He paused before he could finish his sentence. Because Shinichi Miyamoto shook his head with extreme irritation and said in a cold tone, "I can't go down the mountain now." The 2 aides were stunned at the same time. "Someone is targeting me." Shinichi Miyamoto said, "Although I don't know who it is, I'm sure that someone is targeting me now. It's very dangerous. If I act rashly, I may die." "Probably so." Tribulation looked at Han Shishuan and nodded. Then he said, "So we must find them as soon as possible and even bring them back. I don't mind fighting with East Island, but the battlefield and the initiative of the war must be in our hands. If we let them arrange it, we will be too passive. It will be very dangerous for us, no matter the time or the situation." He paused for a second and continued, "So, everyone, bring them back before East Island catches them completely." Yi Fengcheng looked at Tribulation, who was standing straight, and suddenly said with a strange look in his eyes, "You're not going?" "I can't go." Tribulation shook his head. "I have to keep an eye on a person. If he doesn't move, I can't move." He paused for a while and continued, "If the battlefield is finally determined, I will probably set off with him, or find a chance to kill him in advance." Chapter 153. As the former capital of East Island, compared with other big cities in East Island, Zhongjing, which was located inland, was undoubtedly the most inconspicuous one. It might not be accurate to say that it was inconspicuous, but compared to cities such as Dongdu, Ninghu, Jubin, and Bingang, Chukio did look a little less dazzling. In the ancient atmosphere and city, everything in Chukio looked normal, with no shortcomings, but also no advantages. When ordinary people mentioned Zhongjing, words like ancient, heritage, and history were inseparable from Zhongjing. But Zhongjing in the Dark World only had one word: safety. In the whole East Island, Zhongjing was one of the safest cities, even second to Dongdu, which had the divine wind force. Wuji Palace, the biggest holy land of martial arts in the whole East Island, was located in Zhongjing. East Island was a country with a high crime rate, but since the establishment of Wuji Palace, Zhongjing had the fewest major cases in the whole country. Even Dongdu couldn't compare with it. In the past few years, countless masters and elites from the Dark World entered this city, but they were killed by Wuji Palace before they could take action. The Grand Master of the invincible realm of Wuji Palace directly turned the whole of Zhongjing into his own base camp in just a few years, and his foundation went deep into every street and alley of Zhongjing. It was no exaggeration to say that Wuji Palace could see every corner of Zhongjing as far as it could see. Tianhai Wuji, the master of Wuji sword sect, was the well-deserved guardian of the whole Zhongjing. But when this guardian, the sharpest saber in East Island, was gone, the sharpness of the whole Wuji Palace seemed to disappear. This seemed to be an inevitable phenomenon. In East Island, no one dared to deny the strength of Wuji Palace, but this strength was largely built on Tianhai Wuji alone, at least with him as the core. The newly rising Wuji Palace was strong, but its foundation was seriously insufficient, and it didn't form a complete inheritance and system. Most of the time, it was Tianhai Wuji alone who supported the appearance of absolute glory of Wuji Palace. When Tianhai Wuji was not in Zhongjing, Wuji Palace was still prosperous. But as the wind blew, Wuji Palace, which had lost its backbone, suddenly felt like it was about to collapse in the wind and rain. June 12th. Although Limitless Palace's vice palace master wasn't very strong, he controlled most of Limitless Palace's businesses. Shi Menfeng died in his own office. His throat was slit. Including Shimon Fang's secretary, assistant, driver, and bodyguard, a total of 12 people were all killed within 2 minutes. Up to the point of death, none of them had been able to send out a single message. 3 hours after Shi Menfeng's death, Limitless Palace received the news of the Vice Palace Master's death and immediately took action. Within 5 hours, they locked onto the murderer in Zhongjing. Limitless Palace's 2 great protectors, Whitebird and Black Dolphin, led the elites of Limitless Palace to attack at the same time, encircling and annihilating the murderer in Zhongjing West City. The fierce battle lasted for less than half an hour, and most of the street was almost turned into ruins. More than half of the 200 elites were killed or injured, and Protector Heiyu, who had entered the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking realm, was killed on the spot. The murderer swaggered off. Furthermore, he escaped unscathed. June 13th, Limitless Palace's Law Protector Whitebird died during the pursuit. The killer disappeared. In less than 8 hours, Limitless Palace locked onto the whereabouts of the murderer again. The second superior of Limitless Palace, Left Advisor Heavenly Hound, took action in person, and nearly 300 elites assisted him. The entire Zhongjing seemed to fall into a chaotic battle rhythm with this encirclement and suppression. The two sides fought all the way from 33 halls to Zhongjing Tower, drawing an exaggerated battle line of dozens of kilometers in the entire downtown area. The murderer, who was alone before, gradually had reinforcements. The two sides chased and fled, and countless people died. They fought all the way from downtown Zhongjing to the mountain forest at the junction of Zhongjing and Jubin. The elites of Limitless Palace were all killed or wounded, and there were very few reinforcements around the murderer. But the pursuit, which was destined to be endless from the beginning, didn't stop at all, and it continued. June 15th, in the early morning. It was already late at night. The bright moonlight shone on the forest, and the whole world seemed to be quiet. Under a thick ancient tree, Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City, silently nibbled the bread in his hand and calmly stared at the map of East Island in front of him, looking focused. Young master, after passing through this forest, we will enter Juban in about 30 kilometers. Should we find a chance to go back to Dongdu and gather with the main force? A middle-aged man stared at the darkness around vigilantly and asked in a low voice, with undisguised anxiety in his eyes. I'm afraid it's not that easy. Gu Hanshan shook his head. His face was pale, and he looked seriously injured. After several days of continuous fighting, 2 superiors of the thunder-shocking realm died in his hands. Now Gu Hanshan, who was only at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, was brilliant in the battle. But in the end, Heavenly Hound, the left advisor of Limitless Palace, completely suppressed this young heavenly son of Xianxia state. A superior of the half-step invincible realm wasn't someone Gu Hanshan could compete with. He nibbled the bread and said blandly, "Now our identities have been exposed, and the entire East Island is in chaos. In any case, Limitless Palace won't let us go back to Dongdu and gather with the main force. There must be no way to go to Dongdu. Even if there is a way, it's probably a trap." The middle-aged man gritted his teeth and didn't say a word. After several days of continuous pursuit, their supplies had been used up, and all communication tools were completely broken. Now they were trapped in this mountain area and completely lost contact with the outside world. Behind them, there were superiors of the half-step invincible realm chasing after them. The future of these few people was really uncertain. In the depressing silence, several figures quickly and stealthily passed through the forest and came to the 2 of them. "Young Master Gu, the encirclement is getting tighter and tighter. Relatively speaking, the West is still a little loose for the time being. After all, Juban's reaction is a little slow. We can break through the encirclement from the West." West? Gu Hanshan glanced at these people and seemed to be thinking about something. These people were the elites of Xianxia state who sneaked into East Island in advance, or members of the Snowdance Corps. These days, they fought and retreated. Now less than 10% of the elite team of nearly 200 people were left, but their morale was still high. The elite of Xianxia state who was responsible for investigating the surrounding terrain nodded. "Enter Juban, then go through Ninghu, Toyama, we can reach Changdao or Yamaguchi. In this way, aren't we getting farther and farther away from Dongdu?" The middle-aged man beside Gu Hanshan frowned slightly. "There's nothing we can do about it. In an away battle, we don't have the initiative. Now the situation is critical, we can only take it one step at a time." Gu Hanshan shook his head, stood up, and said without hesitation, "Then break through to the west." "To the west? That's a good plan, but can you leave?" A cold voice abruptly rang out from the forest dozens of meters away. In the forest, the bright and sharp lightning flashed slightly, and a figure directly appeared in the darkness. Because of the distance, no one could see his appearance clearly. They could only vaguely see that he wore a moon-white robe. In their sight, the white robe seemed to flutter slightly. In a flash, the bodies of the 2 people at the outermost of Gu Hanshan directly burst into countless pieces of flesh and blood. The blood mist flew and scattered in the forest. The white robe had directly appeared in front of Gu Hanshan. Left advisor of Wuji Palace, Heavenly Hound. In the absence of Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, this superior of the half-step invincible realm could be said to be the real number 1 superior of Wuji Palace. The surrounding air was slightly twisted. Gu Hanshan, who had been silent, suddenly took a step forward. With him as the center, countless rays of light appeared around him in an instant. It was the extremely condensed flame. The hot temperature condensed into a point and spread into a line. There seemed to be countless lasers bursting in the air at the same time, cutting everything. Heavenly Hound subconsciously took half a step back. At the same time, Gu Hanshan had pulled several Xianxia state elites at the periphery behind him. "You go first." He stared at Heavenly Hound in front of him and ordered in a flat tone. Young Master Gu." Behind Gu Hanshan, the faces of several surviving Xianxia state elites changed at the same time. "Don't talk nonsense, Go first. Take the brothers nearby who haven't come back. Gu Hanshan frowned. He said coldly, "This is an order. Go." The middle-aged man who belonged to Kunlun City gritted his teeth and was still hesitating. Several laser lines around Gu Hanshan suddenly turned. Under the hot temperature, a giant tree beside him was swept by a laser. The whole trunk of the tree collapsed instantly, and the cut was smooth. The light was still rotating, sweeping toward several Xianxia state elites nearby without stopping. The middle-aged man's expression changed. He took a step back subconsciously, and then without hesitation he turned around and left. Gu Hanshan stood where he was, motionless. This heavenly son of Xianxia state, who was as famous as Wang Xingxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, looked ordinary. But at this moment, there was a kind of light and fighting desire that people couldn't look directly at him. "You will die here." Heavenly Hound looked at Gu Hanshan seriously and said in a playful tone, "You could have lived a little longer. Is it worth it for a few non-entities?" This super expert, who ranked first among the experts in the entire East Island, had been famous for nearly 20 years. But he was nearly 50 years old and wore a white robe. His face looked like that of a young man in his 30s, handsome and enchanting. Against the bright moonlight, he vaguely looked like a jade tree in the wind. Looking at Gu Hanshan, whose fighting desire kept rising, he narrowed a pair of cold and charming peach blossom eyes and said in a bewitching tone, "Sacrifice them, and you can live at least 2 more days. It's a good result, isn't it?" The remaining Xianxia state elites behind him walked further and further away. Gu Hanshan stood still and said calmly, "I can bleed for Xianxia state, and I can ask others to bleed for Xianxia state, but I have no right to ask others to bleed for me." He spoke very slowly, and Tengu did not seem to mind this deliberate method of delaying time. He responded with an "oh" and said thoughtfully, "But your identity, my identity is a warrior." Gu Hanshan suddenly smiled. The corners of his mouth rose obviously, and his smile was firm and decisive. "Even if one day I become the god of war of Xianxia state, I will still be the most powerful warrior in Xianxia state." There were more and more lasers condensed from flames around him, and they rotated faster and faster. The temperature of the whole forest became hotter. Heavenly Hound nodded. "In this case, then you can die." Gu Hanshan finished what he didn't say. In the dark forest, the fire suddenly rose to the sky. A large number of light beams around him suddenly bloomed, like flowers blooming. Beams of light danced wildly in the lightning that burst out in an instant, sweeping everything. A light curtain made of lightning appeared in front of Heavenly Hound. The dark blue electric arc curled and spread, becoming thicker and thicker. A large number of light beams swept the light curtain and collided with each other, creating sparks. The sparks danced and turned into sparks, burning the forest. The light beams around Gu Hanshan became fewer and fewer, dimmer and dimmer. "Eighth Supreme Sword Dance?" Heavenly Hound smiled playfully and said softly, "You are far from it." Boom! As he spoke, the light screen formed by lightning in front of him instantly spread out. Countless electric arcs shuttled through the air, and within a radius of tens of meters, all the trees exploded. Lightning and fire intertwined and spread out. In an instant, the dark forest nearby shone with light, and it was as bright as day. The light beams around Gu Hanshan had almost completely disappeared. Only a small amount of fire surrounded him, driving his body to keep retreating. His expression was still calm. As his body flew back, the almost majestic sword intent hit Heavenly Hound's body like a tide. The small amount of fire suddenly became vigorous after a short period of dimming. As his body retreated, a surging wave of fire tens of meters long suddenly appeared in the forest. His body retreated. The raging fire moved forward. The wave of fire rushed to the sky tens of meters high. For a moment, the forest and the night seemed to have completely disappeared, and the crazy burning fire occupied all the sight. The dark blue electric arc flashed away. Heavenly Hound moved forward and rushed into the wave of fire tens of meters long alone. He raised one hand and directly grabbed Gu Hanshan's neck. The wind and clouds surged over the forest. A piece of lightning covering a range of hundreds of meters fell without warning. From top to bottom, all the forest in the area covered by the lightning was smashed into dust in an instant. The raging fire on the ground was suppressed in the blink of an eye. In the raging fire, Gu Hanshan's figure became clear again. Heavenly Hound's figure was less than 2 meters away from Gu Hanshan. "It's over." His voice was cold and majestic. But under the full blow, there seemed to be a sense of well-concealed weakness in his tone. His palms stretched forward. As the lightning fell, he grabbed Gu Hanshan's neck. Before the smile bloomed from the corner of his mouth, a fatal danger suddenly shrouded his heart. That was the instinct of a supermaster in the face of death, sharp and accurate. Heavenly Hound felt a chill in his heart. Before he could react, Gu Hanshan, who was choked by him, shouted, "Kill!" Because his neck was choked, the roar sounded hoarse and fierce. With the determination to face death calmly, Gu Hanshan straightened his body and attacked with all his strength. In an instant, the fire that was about to die out in the air suddenly surged, as if it could burn everything. In the blink of an eye, it covered the visible sky. The air was surging and twisting wildly. There seemed to be ice in the raging fire. The ice flashed and reflected the subtle light of the electric arc. In Heavenly Hound's horrified eyes, Gu Hanshan seemed to suddenly burst out all of his strength, all of his combat capability. Chi controlling, ice condensing, fire flaming. He forcibly touched the thunder-shocking realm. He subconsciously wanted to use force to break Gu Hanshan's neck, but his body suddenly floated up. Even his palm was soft and powerless. Vacuum state. Was this a domain? The domain of an invincible realm expert. A bolt of lightning flashed through Heavenly Hound's mind. At this moment, he suddenly realized the origin of the inheritance of the young heavenly son of Xianxia State and his capital. Within a radius of 100 meters, he formed his own void and was invincible in the world. This was the domain of the invincible realm, and it was also one of the 2 paths of the invincible realm. Nowadays, most of the invincible realm experts took the path of martial arts that formed the void domain by themselves. On this path, Kunlun City of Xianxia State claimed to be the best in the world. This might not mean that Kunlun City's domain was the strongest, but their domain was definitely one of the strongest. To put it bluntly, it was because they had 2 kinds of domains. One of them was the pseudo-domain. It was with this pseudo-domain that Kunlun City could make their real strongest unique skill perfect and even dare to claim to be the best in the world. In theory, this kind of pseudo-domain could only be touched after reaching at least the thunder-shocking realm. But Gu Hanshan was different, because he had the real, perfect heavenly king heart. Not only did it make his willpower indestructible, but the sharp fighting intuition of the heavenly king heart and the less consumption in the battle were enough for Gu Hanshan to directly use the pseudo-domain when he was in the fire-flaming realm. Although it was very difficult and only for a moment, it was enough to exchange for any result Gu Hanshan wanted. Heavenly Hound's eyes were frightened. His body floated strangely in the air, and he opened his mouth as if to say no, but he couldn't make any sound. Above the sky, the fire, the ice, the electric arc, and the twisted air all disappeared. There was only the void. Only the void. This was the pseudo-domain of Kunlun City. The 9th style of the 10 skills of true martial arts. Chapter 154. Resume 2 updates. After rushing through the village in front of him, there was an endless forest behind the village. In the drizzle, he did not stop. He bypassed the village and rushed to the forest at full speed. It was too late to think about why the initial hunting operation had turned into a survival game. In 3 days, he had fought 6 battles in a row, and all of them ended in almost complete defeat. The obvious or hidden communication devices on his body had been completely broken, and the signal he left for the Wang family of Beihai on the way had been erased. His injury had almost reached a critical point. Severe pain and fatigue mixed with involuntary weakness spread all over his body. His strength was draining, his physical strength was declining, and his speed was slowing down. Everything in front of him seemed to become hopeless. Only the monster behind him was still tirelessly chasing him. Chasing? Perhaps it was more appropriate to say that he was chasing. After several consecutive battles, there were at least 2 chances when he was infinitely close to death. But at the most critical moment, the other party intentionally or unintentionally withdrew some of his attack power. Although his injuries continued to worsen, he still managed to survive. The pursuit was still going on, neither fast nor slow. It seemed that the other party completely wanted to exhaust him to death. The forest was lush and green. This ancient forest looked a little old. As far as the eye could see, there were towering trees everywhere. The rain fell from the sky, hitting the leaves and falling through the gaps in the treetops. There seemed to be only a kind of quiet, almost beautiful sound of rain left in the whole forest. He wiped away the rain mixed with blood on his face. In the raining forest, there was a handsome face that was firm and peaceful even in a desperate situation. The rain in the air gradually became heavier, falling on the forest and on his face. His face gradually became clean, but his entire person seemed to be in an even more sorry state. His sturdy military boots had been scrapped in the continuous long-distance running. Now he stepped barefoot on the rain-soaked grass. His soft and comfortable clothes were torn everywhere, and a large area of his skin was exposed to the air. Wounds were almost all over his body. Covered with cuts and bruises, he clenched the huge sword in his hand that was nearly 2 meters long and half a meter wide. The violent and sharp momentum continued to rise from his body, but no matter how he looked at it, there was a kind of desolation at the end of the road. After several days of pursuit and rain, he had completely lost his sense of direction. Now, he could only rely on his intuition to know where he was heading. He seemed to be heading north. This was the barren mountain area in the northern part of Wuxia. If he kept going north from here, he should be able to enter Juban. There was no goal for him to escape. The outside world was already a dragnet. He kept walking in the wilderness. All he wanted was to survive. If he could escape the pursuit of the monster behind him and get in touch with the Wang family of Beihai, that would be the best. If he couldn't, he could only persevere until hope appeared. No matter what, he couldn't die. Boom! A roar suddenly sounded in the forest behind him. The blazing heat wave swept through the air, whistling incessantly. A small explosive shell that looked exquisite and elegant, dragging an orange tail flame, directly exploded in the forest with an indescribable aura of danger and death. The shell was precisely positioned. At the moment of the explosion, he, who was holding a giant sword, had already appeared 20 meters away from the explosion range. The strong air wave evaporated the rain, a large number of leaves were lifted up, and the trunk collapsed with a creaking sound. The power of the explosion spread. In the air wave, his body rose and stood on the treetop of a big tree. His face became paler, but his eyes became stern and sharp. Was he finally going to use heavy weapons? He took a deep breath and looked at the rainy sky through the gaps in the treetop. The rain was gradually getting bigger. Being in the forest was his best chance to escape. The monster behind him obviously realized this and directly stepped up the attack. Obviously, it didn't intend to give him any chance. He narrowed his eyes and simply stopped running. Instead, he sat down on the treetop, pulled off a few buttons on his body, crushed them, mixed them with the rainwater, and poured all the powder in the buttons into his mouth. There was no way out, so he could only fight again. In a few days, such a situation had happened several times. Although each battle made his injury more serious, in such a situation, it was hard to say that it was unfair to exchange injuries for time to escape. The rainwater diluted the powder, and he swallowed it together with the powder. When the strong medicine began to take effect, the rumbling footsteps sounded at the same time in the depths of the forest. Dull, clear, and domineering. The footsteps were not fast or slow, and sounded slowly. It was clearly the footsteps of a person, but stepping in the forest, it gave people the momentum of a powerful army charging at the same time. However, it gave off the impression of a magnificent army charging at the same time. Before they even arrived, that extremely strong sense of oppression had already passed through the rain and hit them in the face. He subconsciously held the giant sword in his hand and whispered to himself, "It really is a monster." In his line of sight, a majestic and burly figure had already gradually appeared. To be more precise, he was a giant that was so majestic and tall that it was unimaginable. A real giant armed to the teeth. More than 2 meters tall, with a broad body, wearing a suit of armor that was not painted with any color, exuding a metallic luster. This was a figure that was almost covered in armor from the soles, knees, legs, waist, abdomen, chest, neck, to the extremely ferocious helmet that was tied up high. His entire body was reflecting a similar luster of a special alloy. He was already extremely tall, and wearing this alloy armor that was full of sci-fi and retro feeling made his body taller again. He looked more than 2.5 meters tall. Just by standing there casually, there was a sense of oppression that made people unable to breathe. Crack! He stood firm under the tree, and the armor on his body shook violently. In the eyes of the young man holding the giant sword on the tree, the alloy armor suddenly changed, revealing a ferocious side. The armor that covered almost the entire back of his hand suddenly extended forward again. 2 thick, heavy, and sharp arm blades extended from the palm of the armor. The 2 sides of the arm blades weren't empty either. On the 2 palms of the armor, other than the 2 arm blades, there were also 4 pitch-black gun muzzles. The entire armor was changing rapidly, and sharp alloy bayonets extended from the knees and elbows. The shoulders collapsed slightly, and 2 muzzles poked out. The muzzles of the 2 machine guns on the chest rotated slightly, covering the entire face of the helmet. The place where the eyes should be was slightly lit up, and his eyes were already fixed on his target. In an instant, the originally normal armor had become an unimaginably ferocious appearance. His entire body seemed to have become the most lethal weapon in the blink of an eye. Monster, this was a real metal monster. Under the armor that was at least more than half a ton, the giant's hands clenched and retracted, and both hands suddenly only had the arm blades and muzzles of the armor. He raised his arm, and the arm blades pointed at the target on the tree. A dull roar spread out from the helmet. "Come down, you won't die. I won't die, and you won't catch me." On the treetop, Xianxia, the young heavenly son of the Wang family of Beihai, was expressionless. He said blandly, "It's nothing more than repeating the previous process." "Captain, you're too slow." Captain. There were countless captains in schools, the army, enterprises, the government, and the underworld throughout East Island. But there was only one special one. This was the captain of the Kusanagi force. He was the first super soldier in East Island to succeed in the experiment. He had been upgraded 3 times in a row over the years. Unlike the newly awakened Kusanagi force, the fully armed and fully charged Kusanagi force was a real killing machine. In any case, once such a super force was dispatched, it basically meant that it was invincible and unstoppable. East Island attached great importance to Xianxia. He was a heavenly son of the thunder-shocking realm with the perfect inheritance of wind and thunder veins. It seemed that it was not safe to send such a person to hunt him down without sending an invincible realm expert. The safest way was to wake up the captain of the Kusanagi force. And the captain lived up to everyone's expectations. In a few days he chased Xianxia for thousands of kilometers. Alone, he completely destroyed the entire system of Zhongzhou state in Wuxia. After a few days of bloody fighting, more than 200 elites of Zhongzhou state died in the hands of the captain in various ways. Now only Xianxia was still struggling. He was wearing armor that weighed hundreds of kilograms. He was not fast enough, but he was tireless. If there were no accidents, the chase would come to an end in 2 days at most. "You can't run away." The captain looked up at Xianxia on the treetop, and his dull voice was steady and cold. His order was to capture Xianxia alive. The heir of the Wang family of Beihai was of extraordinary importance to the entire East Island. Xianxia, Gu Hanshan, and Li Tianlan. They were the 3 young heavenly sons who were most likely to stand at the peak of Zhongzhou state and even the dark world in the future. Xianxia was related to the overall situation of East Island, while Li Tianlan was related to the overall situation of Zhongzhou state. Let's not talk about who was more important. But obviously, East Island was most eager to capture Wang Xianxia alive. For this reason, they did not hesitate to wake up the captain of the Kusanagi force. Really? Wang Xianxia stood on the treetop, clenching the huge sword in his hand. His eyes were strange and cold. His originally pale face turned red with just a few words, and even his breathing quickened. The famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai named Firmament was raised gently. The heavy sword body pierced through the rain curtain and pointed to the sky. The captain's body shook. In an instant, all the weapons in his armor were pulled back, leaving only 2 armed sabers. The magical drugs of the Wang family of Beihai could be said to be unparalleled in the world. In the past few days, Wang Xianxia had relied on all kinds of drugs to maintain his basic combat capability. The captain had been used to this, but the moment Wang Xianxia raised his sword, he keenly sensed that something was wrong. This time, it seemed different from before. Completely different. Without hesitation, the captain suddenly raised the armed sabers in his arms, and his giant body instantly rushed to the tree where Wang Xianxia was. At the same time, under the sky, on the sword edge of firmament, a dazzling blue light suddenly lit up. The light expanded in an instant, and the sword intent that had been accumulated for a long time burst out in the blink of an eye in the most violent way. There was a sudden thunder in the sky, and the sound of thunder shook the world. The light on the sword edge spread rapidly. In an instant, a huge blue sword with a length of 100 meters had taken shape. The lightning surged and gathered, and the continuous thunder shook the forest. The extremely explosive sword intent surged down from the sky in an overwhelming way. Crack! The captain's body hit the tree directly. The thick and sturdy tree was instantly smashed into pieces. Wang Xianxia held the sword stiffly and soared into the sky. His figure flew higher and higher. At this moment, all the sword intent and killing in the world seemed to be stepped on by him alone. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, against the way of heaven. He forcibly burned his potential with a seriously injured body that had just entered the thunder-shocking realm. This extremely short sword strike vaguely had the momentum of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The trunk was broken, and the branches were mixed with leaves, flying in the rain. The captain stood under the tree and suddenly looked up. In his sight, the rain all over the sky fell with a pitter-patter. Wang Xianxiao's body flew higher and higher, and he seemed to have become blurred in the lightning. In a trance, he raised the sword edge in the air. The thick and heavy famous sword firmament instantly turned into an arc that seemed to be formed by nature. The 100-meter-long giant sword made of lightning in the air chopped down with the force of Wang Xianxiao's sword swing. The whole world seemed to disappear in an instant. There was only a bolt of lightning falling from the sky, like the will of heaven and earth, and all things surrendered to it, destroying everything. After going against the way of heaven, the unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai. The sword of heavenly law. Above the lightning, Wang Xianxia held firmament and stabbed it straight down. His eyes were resolute and silent. In the heavy rain, he seemed to have disappeared, leaving only a will that broke out to the extreme. Sword intent, martial arts, glory, future, everything disappeared in his mind. Under the sword of heavenly law. It was heaven and earth. Boom! The lightning and the sword edge fell almost at the same time. In the heavy rain, the endless light that shone in the world rose to the sky in the forest in the rain. Within a radius of 100 meters, all the dust, trees, rainwater, and grass were completely destroyed by the light. The whistling airwaves swept through the forest, and a large, desolate, almost dazzling blank space suddenly appeared in the forest. Chapter 155. The ruins were desolate and silent at night. Moderate rain, no moon, and strong wind. A lot of garbage was piled up, and some scrapped machines were scattered everywhere. As the strong wind roared, some paper scraps and plastic bags in the ruins kept flying in the wind, and then they were hit by the rain. The windows of the dilapidated buildings were completely broken, and several dangerous buildings were slightly tilted. Behind the windows was a dark space that seemed to swallow everything. This was an abandoned factory in the suburbs of Changdao. The factory covered an area of 300 acres, which showed the prosperity of its heyday. But as it went bankrupt in the financial crisis a few years ago, it became extremely desolate. This kind of uninhabited, dirty, messy, and poor place was the favorite of many homeless people and beggars in Changdao. It was also the best place for some gangs to fight and trade. Similarly, because of the messy internal facilities of the factory and the complicated terrain, it was also the best place to hide. In the dark wind and rain, there was a vague shadow cutting through the darkness. The speed of the shadow was extremely fast. In the dim environment, it flashed and disappeared. It was so fast that it was almost an illusion. The shadow rushed through the factory, and without any hesitation, it rushed directly into the dark space inside the factory. The wind and rain were dark. The pervading night was getting darker, and the whole world was dark. Messy footsteps sounded in the distance, accompanied by car horns and sirens, coming closer and closer. The rotors of the armed helicopters whistled, and the airflow surged in the air. From the sky to the ground, countless bright lights shone in the factory, and countless areas of the whole factory were shrouded by the light in the fastest time. The beams formed by the lights crossed in the darkness, and the raindrops became more and more obvious. The rumbling footsteps were already close to the factory. Concise and effective orders were issued one after another in an orderly manner. People in police uniforms or civilian clothes, armed with guns, rushed into the factory in a large number of groups, keeping an attacking posture and searching. Time passed slowly. The group at the front took the lead and rushed into the building closest to the gate. Submachine guns with infrared light glanced around nervously. In the quiet and almost dead silence, the sound of heartbeats even suppressed the sound of footsteps. Everyone could almost hear their rapid and explosive heartbeats. The other teams rushed up to the second floor. After the team on the first floor confirmed that there was nothing, they finally let out a long sigh. After a brief silence, the team leader took out the walkie-talkie and said in a hoarse voice, "Building 1, the first floor is safe." They didn't know who they were besieging, but in a war like this, it didn't matter who they were besieging. The most important issue was how much damage the target could cause. The scale of this encirclement was enough to explain everything. Long Island Special Police, Ordinary Police, the Underworld, and the occasional recognized experts who disguised themselves in the underworld but actually belonged to the military, and some people whose identities were not clear but had very special privileges, helicopters, rocket launchers, sniper rifles, the bombardment and precision attacks were balanced, and the dense firepower coverage was also extremely complete. Such a scale was enough to show how powerful the encirclement was and how dangerous the other party was. The danger had already been demonstrated. After 12 hours of continuous pursuit, they suffered countless casualties. After 3 superiors of the Thundershocking realm and 7 or 8 superiors of the Fire-Flaming realm died in a row, Changdao finally made the most intense response. They started to use all kinds of forces to besiege and intercept the target at all costs. The search team had to come because of the need of work. But it was the greatest luck that they didn't find the target, which was basically a dead target. Next, let's see who was unlucky enough to meet the lunatic. Building 1, the 3rd floor is safe. Building 1, the 5th floor is safe. Building 1, the 1st floor is safe. Please move. At the gate of the factory, amid the busy scene of people coming in and out, 3 figures stood quietly in front of the gate, waiting for all the search team's reports. Among the 3, 2 of the middle-aged men were no longer young. The middle-aged man on the left was about 50 years old. He was short, but he looked strong and valiant. The other man was fat, and under the light, his face was covered with oil. At this moment, the fat middle-aged man was holding an umbrella for the person in the middle. His waist was slightly bent, as if he wanted to stay away from the person next to him, but he didn't dare to let the person get wet. He could only try to reach out his hand, making a very strange posture. The rain had soaked most of his body, but he didn't realize it. He just smiled humbly and humbly. Many search teams coming and going saw this scene, and they were a little stunned, but they didn't dare to say anything. This fat middle-aged man, who was like a pug trying to please its master, could be regarded as an out-and-out big shot in the whole Changdao. He was Tufei Tianguang, the director of the Changdao Police Department. If this identity wasn't enough, he could add the title of a member of Yamaguchi-gumi, which was enough to prove that this fat pig had the ability to be omnipotent in both the underworld and the underworld in Changdao. But now Tufei Tianguang was acting like this, which was completely contrary to his identity. Everyone subconsciously looked at Tufei Tianguang's side. The night rain was killing. The wind was howling. In the cold and dangerous environment, the red dress seemed to be the origin of the surging tenderness between heaven and earth. It was a young woman dressed in red. The high slit of her dress exposed her snow-white, slender legs to the air. Her black waist-length hair was neatly combed. Her exquisite, almost perfect face seemed a little pale and haggard, but that frail beauty only added to her charm. She stood quietly beside Tufei Tianguang, letting the fat pig next to her hold an umbrella for her. Her eyes, which were as bright as cold stars, stared straight at the factory through the rain, expressionless. The red dress was like fire. The momentum was like water. The water seemed to be flowing softly in the deep night, but it carried a kind of biting charm and danger. Mai Shiranui, the young palace master of Liuhua Palace and the young heavenly son of East Island. Nearby search teams were coming and going. Mai Shiranui completely ignored the strange and intoxicated gazes around her and listened to the report from the walkie-talkie. She picked up the walkie-talkie and said in a crisp, cold, and strangely delicate voice, "Stay put in the first building. Report to the other teams. The first floor of the second building is safe. The third floor of the second building is safe. The second building is safe." Mai Shiranui was silent for a moment, and then said calmly, The periphery operation is going well. We have almost completed the encirclement and are checking the blind spots. Turn on the satellite images and thermal imaging. It's useless, but we can be sure that the target hasn't left the factory. The third building? The first floor of the third building is safe. The second floor of the third building is safe. The third floor is found. Bang, 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 bang. Violent gunshots suddenly sounded from the walkie-talkie, as if countless notes that symbolized death had suddenly exploded, roaring in everyone's ears. Target found. Target found. Everyone, attack and surround the third building. With a sharp and rapid roar, Mai Shiranui, who was standing at the door, shot straight into the factory. The air was scorching hot, and for a moment, all the rain was completely evaporated on her way. In her sight, the red figure flashed and went away in an instant. Requesting support. Enemy attack. Enemy attack. Group 6 was silent. Group 9 was silent. Group 5 was silent. My God, there's still someone alive. He's coming up and he's very fast. Request helicopter. Bang, bang, bang. In the gunshots, the roar from the third building fell silent. When the gunshots stopped, the whole walkie-talkie was dead silent. Tufei Tianguang opened his mouth and was about to speak when a little fire lit up in the distance through the rain. The fire swayed and expanded in an instant. The whole third building was suddenly in a sea of fire. The fiery red dress soared into the sky in the flames and rushed straight to the third floor. Her sharp voice echoed in a large area, sharp and cold. Li Tenlon, you can't run away. Boom. Before Mai Shiranui's voice had died away, the fire in the third building twisted slightly, and then a large fire rose. For a moment, the raging fire occupied everyone's sight. All the gunshots disappeared completely, and the endless flames merged with each other and then reignited again. The sword intent as cold as winter howled and rose in the whole floor. The sword energy rushed into the sky, and the extremely powerful sword intent swept everything. Under the sword intent, the raging fire suddenly condensed in Mai Shiranui's sharp voice. Countless flames gathered in an instant and turned into a huge fireball in the blink of an eye. The gloomy night was completely lit up by the fire. Mai Shiranui finally saw the opponent in front of her again, who had been fighting with her for a few days and was getting crazier instead of weaker. The sharp and heavy silver spear came across the air, but it was driven by the extremely sharp and crazy sword intent. A little condensed fire lit up on the tip of the spear. The long spear stabbed straight. My Shiranui held up the huge fireball with both hands and slammed it down. The silver spear tip and the fireball collided fiercely. The raging flames silently swept across the sky. There was no sound at all. But in an instant, dense cracks appeared on the entire building. Boom! The violent sound suppressed my Shiranui's scream. The entire building, which was covered in cracks, collapsed in an instant. Countless stones were blown away in the intense fire and rain. The building collapsed, and dust rose directly from the air along with the flames. Black smoke billowed. My Shiranui, in a red dress covered with dust, rushed out of the collapsed ruins with the fire and scanned the surroundings vigilantly. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.